More recently, humanity has been drawn into a brutal, bloody war people desperately tried to win. Still, the price of war was the fate of an entire race. It was too great a price for people to pay. The earth was invaded by vile creatures that were countless in number. They knew no pity, and they destroyed all in their path. Fighting them was especially cruel to their leader, so people invented combat suits. The leader of the monsters was a huge, bloodthirsty, and incredibly strong dragon. It seemed that the people were doomed to perdition. But at the same time on Earth began to appear people with superpowers who were called Seekers. They could resist the dragon army and defeat monsters. The selfless deaths of untold numbers of Psykers seemed for a moment to pave the way for the humans to their long-awaited victory. Still, the vile creatures returned 15 years later. However, according to the prophecy of the bearer of the gift of foresight, the people founded the ARC to train the Psykers, which was supposed to help them fight the dragon. The organization gathered gifted children from birth together to prepare them for the decisive battle for all mankind before the prophecy was fulfilled with only 3 years left. One of the Psykers decided to single-handedly stop the dragon and end the war. He was sure he would have been able to defeat the bloodthirsty monster, but the dragon was too strong for him. The dragon knocked his weapon out of his hands and attacked him with deadly flames. The Psyker had no chance of escaping, burning alive in his battlesuit. Psyker woke up with horror. He was terrified. He put his hands on his head and was worried that he had once again had this horrible dream in which he was being killed by a dragon. He thought it might have happened to him today. In the army, today was the day of the arrival of the last recruits who were to be trained to quickly and effectively destroy monsters. A helicopter was already almost at the base, on board of which was a special soldier. Li Han was only 10 years old, but he managed to impress the commanders who were considering his case. Although he was very young, he was already the leader of a gang of orphans. The general looked at him and told him not to worry. They were not going to send him to prison. The general then asked the young man if he had heard anything about the ARC organization. Li Han was surprised to hear the question and asked the general if he was referring to the Psyker training center. He couldn't believe he was one of the Psykers because he was still young and didn't know how to fight monsters. The general was amazed that he was smart, but he said that Li Han would not have been an ordinary soldier. He was sure that in the future the boy would have saved humanity. He said that now he could forget about hunger and life in the slums. Li Han was unhappy that only he would be fed and given shelter over his head. He was angry that his younger brothers and sisters would continue to die in the slums from hunger and cold. He looked menacingly at the general and said that if they wanted to send him to the organization, they would have to take care of his brothers and sisters too. They would have to provide them with food, clothing, education, and everything they needed. The general put his hand on the table and accepted the young soldier's terms. He promised to personally take responsibility for the men dear to him, but he had one condition. He added that he would take care of his family and give them everything they needed, but that was only as long as he was in the organization as a Psyker. Li Han looked at him and replied that he understood it perfectly well. He was ready to go to their organization and start training. He was sure he would manage, but he didn't know what was ahead of him. They agreed with the general, and Li Han boarded the military plane that brought him to the organization. He was the only recruit invited to the organization, and they were sure he could save humanity. Stepping off the plane, he remembered their conversation with the general who had told him that people with psycho abilities were assigned ranks, and his rank wasn't that high yet. The general asked him to try to survive if he really cared about all his family members. Li Han leisurely headed to the organization. He was almost there. Li Han was almost at the main building when he heard strange noises. He turned around and saw a crowd of people. He heard someone very angrily asking the recruit to go back to where he came from. He saw a guy yelling at a guy lying on the ground, and he told him to get out of the organization. He was furious because he had just been brought to this place, and he was already crying worse than a baby. The guy added that it was because of recruits like him that he was not put in anything, and he continued to mock and taunt the crying young man who could not stand up to him. The recruit heard behind his back other recruits didn't think he was better than the crying guy. Then he turned around and angrily replied that they were idiots who didn't even reach his minimum. He explained to them that he was a Psyker who had already been trained. He used his ability and raised the stone above his hand. It was obvious that he was already stronger than many of the recruits standing behind him. The recruits were incredibly shocked when they saw his abilities. Some of them the first time they had ever seen anyone use their abilities. It shocked them that they would be facing a trained psyker. Psyker picked up a rock and pointed it at the new recruit, who had barely gotten off the ground. He wondered if he would be sent home or not, and he added that it was impossible for people like that to survive here. He was sure the recruit would thank him later, so he threw a rock at him and shouted at him to get out of the organization. The psyker decided to get rid of the weak recruits. Li-Han managed to catch the stone, but said that it was very slow for him. He told him that it would be more effective to just throw the stone with his hand without using his ability. The guy couldn't understand where he came from or why he decided to stand up for the other recruit. Li-Han replied that he was the one who would teach him manners. He threw away his stone and was ready to attack him and teach him a lesson. Li-Han got into a fight with the Seeker, and the other recruits were excited and happy that they could watch them fight. They wanted him to teach the cocky Seeker a lesson, and they didn't even notice anyone approaching them. The commander approached them and shouted for everyone to listen to what he would tell them. The recruits parted. Li-Han and Psyker stopped the fight and watched as the commander approached them. He approached them and threateningly told them both to take a step forward. They looked at him and could not understand who he was or how he was in this place. They looked at him intently and waited for him to start talking. The commander asked them both to introduce themselves to him. He wanted to know who they were. The psyker stood up straight and gave his name, Del Simon, followed quietly by Li-Han. He was surprised to see Del Simon in front of him. He looked at him and said that he had already been trained. He asked if his special skill as a psyker had manifested itself. Del Simon raised his head, looked into the commander's eyes, and replied that so far, he had only mastered psychokinesis. Li-Han looked at him and didn't understand what special skill the commander was talking about. Not listening to his report, the commander suddenly hit him. Del Simon did not expect the blow, and he did not have time to block it. The commander's blow hit exactly on target, and it was incredibly strong. The commander couldn't believe that the psyker was so confident that he thought he was better than the rest. To him, he was just trash who still had a lot to learn. He looked at the second fighter. Now it was his turn to introduce himself and talk about his special skills. Li-Han raised his head, not knowing what to expect from the commander. The commander looked at him and said he approved of his desire to help the weak, which was important for service in the organization. Still, the commander decided to tell him something else. He gave him a blow of equal strength. He added that, without an ability comparable in power to psychokinesis, he was even more trash to him, as he was incapable of anything. They both fell to the ground from the impact, and the commander told them to listen to him carefully. In 3 weeks, the first year of their training would begin, and if they had not mastered psychokinesis by then, they would be out of the organization. He added that he forgot to introduce himself. His name was John Red. He was an instructor who would make them underdogs, who were worse than trash warriors with exceptional abilities who, in the future, would face off in a battle with a dragon. John Red said that was the end of the introductory speech, and now they would begin training immediately. He ordered them to wind circles until their instructor told them to stop. He gave the command to start them, and they all ran. The instructor told them that if they gave up, they would immediately fly out of the organization. Li-Han ran and thought that he was used to being treated like this, and it wasn't the first time for him. Some of the recruits could no longer run. They were nauseous, and John Red shouted at them that they were useless infirmities. He ordered them to stay out of the way and return to where they came from. Li-Han ran past and saw their instructor order the 2 recruits to leave the sports field and not disturb the others. Li-Han was sure that he could withstand such exertion. He remembered the psychic ability the instructor had talked about, and he realized it was something he was really worried about. He didn't know if he could use it as well as that guy, if he had it at all. One of the recruits could no longer continue to run. He collapsed to the ground without strength. He realized that he would be out of the organization without learning his special skills. He collapsed and couldn't move anymore. The instructor approached him and said he was lousy trash, and that if he went to bed, he'd better go home. The guy was in tears and could hardly speak. He told the commander that he wasn't sure if he could continue running, but he didn't have time to finish and couldn't say that he had given up. Li-Han picked him up and said that he hadn't given up yet. He surprised not only the new recruit, but also the instructor, who couldn't believe his eyes that he was going to run with him. He looked at the recruit and asked him if he had really given up yet. Through tears, he replied that he was still in line and was ready to continue the test the instructor had given them. Li Han picked him up, and they both started running. The new recruit was shocked and didn't understand why he had to help him or why he was protecting him, but Li Han only thought that they had a long way to go. When the sun was beginning to set and it was dark outside, the instructor pulled out his whistle and ordered all the recruits to stop. Their ordeal was over. Li Han and the rest of the recruits collapsed on the ground, weak. They didn't even have the energy left to rejoice at the end of the ordeal. They just lay there and tried to rest. The instructor approached them and summarized the results, informing them that out of 73 candidates for enrollment in their organization, only 40 recruits remained who could become excellent seekers. John Red said that was all for today. Tomorrow, they would start the real training. He added that during the training period, they would run the same distance they had covered the day every morning. The recruits were shocked when they found out that a similar run awaited them every morning. They thought it was done to weed out the weak, but now they could also drop out of the organization themselves. The next day, at 5 a.m. sharp, their training in the organization began, and waiting for them was their morning run. Li Han competed with Del Simon, trying to overtake him and finish the run first. After jogging, all the recruits waited for breakfast, which started at 8 a.m. They had to eat very quickly because at 9 a.m. they had a morning class that could not be missed. The instructor told them to imagine that within them, there was an area within which psychoenergy was formed. It could be located in the head, heart, or lower abdomen. He said that an integral part of their training was imagination. Li Han listened attentively to the instructor and, after his words, decided that, in that case, he had chosen the heart for his psychoenergy. After the morning lecture, they were waiting for lunch, which started at 12:30 in the afternoon. He was walking through the mess hall when he noticed a recruit sitting alone at a table whom he had stood up for and who had helped him run. Li Han sat down at his table and offered him lunch with him. His name was Kuro, and he agreed to have lunch with him. Li Han thought that Kuro had become his first friend in the organization and life in general. He wished him a pleasant appetite, and they started eating. Del Simon walked past their table and stopped in front of them momentarily. Li Han raised his head and glared back at him, but they both knew they couldn't pick a fight in the dining room. Del Simon moved away from them, and Kuro said that he had heard that Del Simon was studying at a school for gifted children in the UK. Li Han replied that he was not surprised he saw that he was too arrogant. Li Han said that as sad as it sounded, he already could do so, and he hoped that they would also be able to master psychokinesis in 3 weeks of training. Kuro replied that he already knew how to use psychokinesis. He just hadn't tried it in public yet, and he didn't want Li Han to be upset about it. Li Han looked at him and with a smile asked him if he was joking when he said he possessed psychokinesis. He added that Kuro, as it turned out, was not so simple. I thought it would be good for him to stop worrying about others. After dinner, they were scheduled to attend evening classes and practice fighting and jogging, which was mandatory for them, and the instructor did not give them any indulgences. When they successfully completed the run, they would go to the shower. After the shower, dinner was scheduled, followed by a personal inspection of their belongings and an evening roll call. After 10 p.m., the recruits had to go to sleep and gain strength for the new day, but Li Han was lying on his bed and could not sleep. Different thoughts in his head did not give him peace. Li Han thought that there was food, a bed, and a shower. He realized that the living conditions were much better than before. It was nothing compared to before only. He wanted to go back home, but he had no right to be weak. After 2 weeks, Li Han heard that another recruit had succeeded in using psychokinesis, and he realized that more and more guys were mastering psychokinesis. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't master it. He practiced hard, but nothing worked. He didn't understand what the problem was or how to raise the pencil lying in front of him. Li Han didn't know what to do. He thought he wasn't talented enough. He tried to find out Kuro's secret of possession, but he didn't know any secret ways to master the ability. Kuro told him that there was a man he could ask for advice from. He was talking about Del Simon, who already possessed psychokinesis and had been trained as a psyker. Del Simon noticed that Li Han was approaching them. He smiled and told everyone to look at who had come to them and wonder what he wanted from them. Li Han clenched his fists and told him he had already guessed why he had come to him. Del Simon turned away and smirked, asking if he wanted to know the secret of psychokinesis. His expression changed, and he said that he thought he had forgotten. Del Simon asked him who else had recently told him about Li Han's manners, and he realized what he was implying. Li Han knelt in front of him and asked him to help and teach him how to master psychokinesis. Li Han knew that if he didn't master it, he would be kicked out of the organization, but he couldn't let that happen. Del Simon told him to get up. He was willing to teach him. He asked Del Simon to hand him a pencil, and Del Simon warned him that if he asked for it himself, he would not complain later. He took the pencil and attacked him, hitting him right in the chest. Li Han didn't expect the blow and didn't understand at all what was happening or why he started attacking him with the pencil. The commander smoked a cigar and looked at the street. He did not pay attention to the military plane flying over him. He thought that 3 weeks had passed and realized that time was indeed flying fast. Suddenly, a man came into the room. He was very happy to see him and said that he was sure he would find him here, to which the instructor replied that he had not seen him for a long time. He covered his nose with his hand and noted that the room had a terrible stench. He reminded the instructor that there was no smoking in the room. The instructor didn't like his words and asked him why he had come to see him. The man sat down in a chair and said it was not important. Since he had already come, he suggested they go downstairs together. However, he was interested in a different question. He wanted to know his opinion of the recruits he was training. The instructor looked at him and immediately replied that the recruits were idiots who had a lot to teach. The man couldn't believe he was talking about them like that. He thought it was a bad joke on his part. But after calming down a bit, he thought and told him that at least 2 of the recruits could be useful to the organization. The man was shocked. 2 recruits were not what he wanted to hear from him. He said that Del Simon wasn't bad, he just didn't like his temper. But at this point, he was already stronger than anyone who had completed the first level of training. The man wondered if this was the last genius from the Psyker Training Center in the UK. He had high hopes for him, and he was happy that Del Simon was in this place. The instructor went on and told him about the second guy. He said he was very loyal and thought he was the most spiritually resilient of all the recruits. He was sure he would make a perfect soldier. However, the organization needed not ordinary soldiers, but superhumans. The instructor understood that without psycho abilities, Li Han had nothing to do. Their organization was looking for people who could save all mankind from the dragon. The man smiled and said that on the way over, he had heard something. He asked him if he knew what the recruits called him amongst themselves. The instructor was sure it was something like bastard or worse. He wouldn't be surprised. He fell silent and was surprised that the instructor had guessed exactly what the recruits were calling him, which amazed him a little. He realized that he had well studied his subordinates, who were calling the instructor names among themselves. The next day, Instructor John Red lined up the recruits he was training and told them that today was the beginning of their first year of training, but that wasn't all. He added that this applied only to those who had mastered the skills necessary for a Psyker to continue training in the organization. This was a mandatory basic skill, an external manifestation of the ability to concentrate psycho energy. The instructor told them that while using it, their eyes would glow. He told them to forget about psychokinesis and stay in formation. They had to be able to at least do that. He explained that those who had managed to master the outward manifestation were to march and line up before the specialist, and pointed to the man he had recently spoken to about the recruits. The instructor said those who failed to master the outward manifestation had to go the other way, where helicopter agents would take them back home. Li Han noticed among the agents a man who promised to take care of his family. He also noticed among them a general who came to see personally how the training was going and what the recruits had already achieved. The selection began. The recruits ran in different directions. Some successfully passed the test, and some, in tears, returned home. The instructor drove them and asked them not to slow down or move their legs. Li Han stood still and waited for the others to pass the test. He realized that he had not mastered the outer manifestation. He was trying to quickly think of something to continue training in the organization and thus protect his relatives from poverty. He took his hand to the spot where Del Simon had struck him with his pencil and remembered the blow and what he had experienced at that moment, a valuable lesson for him. However, he didn't think he would help him at first. Li Han remembered that day and how surprised he had been at the training method Del Simon had chosen. He thought he had just wanted to kill him, even though he wasn't sure. Del Simon answered him not to worry. His wound was not deep, but through this pain, it would be easier for him to concentrate. He added that the wound would become his psycho channel. He told him to imagine drawing psycho energy through his wound just by keeping his hand on his chest for a few days. He would not achieve what he desired and would lose time. Lee Han realized that Del Simon knew his center was in his heart. He saw him give the pencil back to another recruit, but he refused to take it back because he had soiled it in blood. He could keep the pencil. He was sure that from that very day, he had begun to feel an energy that seemed to have long been lost to him, but he didn't know what he needed to do to release it. John Red shouted that Lee Han was the last one left. All the others had already been distributed. He ordered him not to stand and start the demonstration. He held his hand over his heart, hoping he would be able to show the outward manifestation. Kuro was worried about his friend. He realized that he could be kicked out of the organization. Lee Han focused and thought that he should have stayed, but he couldn't go back. The instructor did not tolerate his antics and went over to teach him a lesson. Obviously, the instructor was mad that Lee Han did not follow his orders. He approached him and said that the soldier had to always obey the orders of his superiors, or he would be punished severely. However, Lee Han did not lose concentration and continued to stand still. The instructor decided to punish him for not following orders. He believed that Lee Han had to follow orders without exception. He swung and prepared to strike his blow at the recruit standing in front of him. Lee Han realized that now he would get hit, but he chose to stand. He realized that he had to do something at least, so he tried to force himself to think and show him an outward manifestation. Before the instructor hit him, he saw a pen in his pocket. He thought that nothing else had occurred to him anyway and decided to use his pen for his own purposes. The instructor saw that Lee Han had managed to steal the pen from him, but he didn't have time to notice and react to it. Lee Han raised his hand and thought that he had only one option if nothing was coming out because the channel was closed. Lee Han stabbed his heart area with all his might with his pen, and he decided to open the channel as wide as possible. Everyone around him was shocked and did not expect such actions from him. The instructor grabbed him by the socker and menacingly asked him what he was doing. He was beyond angry. He thought Lee Han had decided to die right in their organization. Lee Han threw the pen that was covered in blood. He was trembling and crying, and when he opened his eyes, it was clear that he had managed to open the channel. His eyes were glowing, meaning he had passed the selection. When John Red saw this, he let him go and left, telling him that he had never met such an idiot as him in his entire life. Lee Han collapsed to the ground, but he demonstrated his ability. The instructor started to leave, but suddenly he turned around and looked at Lee Han and congratulated him on successfully passing the test. Lee Han sat on the ground and looked at him in surprise, tears of joy flowing from his eyes as he was happy. Lee Han got up and headed to the group that had successfully passed the demonstration. He thought he had done well, and now, like everyone else, he could start training to be a seeker. Kuro came up to the group and asked if he was okay because he had stabbed his pen almost into his heart, to which Lee Han replied that he was fine and it didn't hurt at all. He was also approached by a specialist who gave him a special watch as a token of his success. The specialist was happy that he had succeeded in his task and joined his group. Lee Han was shocked and didn't know what to say. The specialist explained to him that it was his newest development in the organization. It was a bracelet-like device. As soon as he put it on his arm, it scanned him and registered him successfully. He couldn't believe that it was now his device. He was impressed, and the specialist added that soon he would tell him what it was capable of, but there was no time for that now. The instructor yelled for everyone to pay attention to him and informed them that the assignment process was almost complete. They needed to be grouped into classes as soon as they were checked off the list. John Red told them there were only 4 classes in the organization, from A to D. To be placed in each class, you had to master specific abilities. He said that today, they would see the results of their 3 weeks of training, but he asked them to remember that they would have to improve their skills if they wanted to advance to the next level. John Red congratulated the 25 tested on their enrollment. He realized that all this time they must have thought he was still a bastard. They couldn't understand how he knew what they called him behind his back. The specialist listened attentively to what the instructor said to those who joined the organization. When he heard what he was telling them about his nickname, he knew he was hurt. John Red decided to make it clear before they proceeded with the distribution. He told them that he wasn't just a bastard, he was a real devil in the flesh to them. Only one person got into the A class, Del Simon, who was better prepared than the others. 4 people got into the B class, including Kuro, who was still unsure of his abilities. John Red further announced the list and said that 5 people in the C class decided to be taken away by the specialist and 15 people in the D class, among whom was Li Han. Li Han thought that starting with the D grade was already good. He was sure that he would be able to raise his rank to a higher one very soon. He was determined. Instructor John Red added that all the other privates were left in the care of Instructor Wei Chen, who stood beside him and was silent. He waited until John Ray finished the distribution. Instructor Wei Chen could instill fear in anyone with his appearance alone. He did not smile or talk unnecessarily. He was a very stern-looking instructor. The privates who came under his command were shocked. They thought he was very huge. He looked even more intimidating than Sergeant John Red. But unexpectedly, Sergeant Wei Chen turned to them, smilingly introduced himself to them, and said that he was a weapons instructor. He warned that it would be hard, but if they worked together, they would succeed. The privates still looked at him fearfully, but they thought he was a gentleman, and things were not as bad as they might have thought. Sergeant John Red ordered them all to disperse to their respective classes. Del Simon was the first to go, followed by Kuro, uncertain and afraid of the unknown ahead. Kuro was walking, and tears started to form in his eyes as he thought that he would not be able to pass the training further. As he passed by Li Han, he heard him tell him to stop worrying. Everything would be fine, and he would be able to handle everything. Li Han supported him and added that he would catch up with him very soon. He was sure that he would be able to raise the rank in no time. Now Kuro felt confident, and he happily went to his class. Wei Chen happily told his charges that it was now time to run to the training hall. He was looking forward to it. He wanted to see what they were capable of. Coming to the training hall, Wei Chen decided to be the first to show his martial abilities. He took a spear and began to demonstrate the ranks of his skills. He incredibly technically wielded the spear, showing them complex techniques. The privates were shocked when they saw what Sergeant Wei Chen was capable of. He showed them his better weapon skills and said he would be able to teach them martial arts. He thought they wondered why people were trained to fight dragons with spears and swords. He explained that the point was that they were psycho equipment that they would use in battle. The instructor added that nothing on Earth was capable of absorbing psycho energy. Still, the skin and bones of dragons not only contained it but could transmit it. He said that weapons created from such materials could seriously wound the dragon, but they still had to master all kinds of weapons before they could fight the dragon. Li Han listened attentively to the instructor. He wondered how the Psykers had slain dragons before the advent of such swords and spears, and how battles had been fought before. The instructor sadly told him that initially the Psykers had fought the dragon in hand-to-hand combat. Then, one single dragon could kill the Psykers by the hundreds. Still, it was impossible to deal with it otherwise. He said that some of them attacked and supported their allies from a distance, but the only way to finally kill a dragon was with weapons used for close combat. The instructor explained that this required piercing vital organs and releasing psycho energy, which was known as strikers. The privates were delighted by the instructor's stories and impressed by the strikers. Then Wei Chen offered to pick up a weapon for each of them, thinking that they were still children despite being in the organization. Li Han decided to use a spear as a weapon. When he took it in his hands, the instructor approached him and asked him if he preferred spears, to which Li Han nodded positively. He did not think that Wei Chen would approach him. The instructor looked at him carefully and thought that the wind blowing and the sound of his spear swings that he had felt earlier had a promising aura. He decided to take a closer look at Li Han. How Li Han resolutely and courageously stood up to Sergeant Red impressed him. He was sure that his character had been tempered by past overly harsh living conditions. The sergeant was a little upset when he realized what the young private had to go through. As unfortunate as it was, the private already had to fight for what he held dear. The instructor looked at him and told him to try his best and that he would do his best to help him, to which Li Han nodded positively. 2 weeks had passed, and Li Han was sparring on spears with a classmate. They had to show what they had learned in these 2 weeks, and they were both not going to give in to each other. Li Han looked at him and noticed that his classmate Jose was apparently exhausted. He suggested that he just give up so that he wouldn't get injured in the fight with him. Jose smiled and pretended not to understand what Li Han had said to him, adding that he was the one who had been holding on to their fight, even though he looked brave. He didn't waste time talking and decided to take Li Han by surprise. While he was distracted by the conversation, Jose quickly approached him and made an attack with his spear. But Li Han managed to block it and didn't let himself be injured. Li Han counterattacked and made his attack. He knocked the weapon out of Jose's hands, and now he was defeating him. Jose was incredibly surprised that he had succeeded in stripping him of his weapon. Li Han thought it was already the second week of the first year, and he was the second person after the class president, Jose, who had defeated all the D class students in a gun duel. After Li disarmed him, Jose put his hands up and said he had beaten him, but wasn't upset. He was glad he had managed to win and had a worthy opponent in his class. They shook hands, and Li Han said that Jose had a lot to learn. Jose replied that he would be moved to the C class next week, but he was already aware of it. Jose said that someone would have to be class president instead. Jose added that he thought he was the perfect person for the position of class president, to which Li Han replied uncertainly that his desire alone might not be enough. But Jose answered him that it was not only his decision. He pointed his finger at the other privates standing behind him and said that they thought so too. He explained to him that they had already discussed it, and everyone was happy to see him as class president. Li Han was pleasantly surprised that everyone in the class considered him worthy of the position. He looked at them all and thanked them for honoring him. He thought that being class president was one step on the way to the next rank. The next day, Sergeant John Red looked at him with special anger, for he remembered what Li Han had done at the demonstration. They had not seen each other again since then, but now he was in front of him again. Li Han looked at him and felt a familiar feeling. He was afraid of the sergeant, who was staring at him with an embittered look. He didn't know what to expect, so he stood still and didn't say anything to him without permission. The soldiers in the gym were discussing Sergeant John Red. They also thought he was a rare bastard. He was mean and showed no pity. They knew he had a temper, and they'd been beaten by him before. When they were new recruits and first met Sergeant Red, they thought that nothing worse could happen to them and that he would have a duel with a recruit who hadn't even been in the organization for a year. They climbed out the window to watch the fight. They yelled at him to get a good beating from the sergeant. They were excited, and they knew the sergeant would just crush him. Sergeant John Red noticed the soldiers who had climbed out of the windows to await their fight. Everyone in the organization wanted to see him in action as soon as possible. The instructor smoked a cigar and thought they were all snotty puppies to him. Li Han took his sharpened spear and prepared to launch his attack. He didn't care that a sergeant in front of him inspired fear in everyone in the organization. He wasn't willing to surrender. The sergeant was surprised that no one else wanted to be class president. He said that his psychokinesis wasn't even stable. He asked if they wanted to entrust an entire group to such a person. The whole class stood still and silent. They were confident in their choice and wanted Li Han to become the new class president. The sergeant said they were just fools. He didn't understand why they had so much faith in him. Li Han looked at him and wanted to know what the sergeant would do next. John Red took a floor cloth and broke it, then threw the pointed spear to Li Han, who deftly managed to catch it. The sergeant said that he had heard that Li Han was the best in martial arts. He asked him to prove it to him and offered to arrange a duel. Li Han said that his weapon was too sharp for combat. The instructor was confident in his strength and asked him if he seriously thought some novice could not get him with such a weapon, to which Li Han replied that he was not sure he could hurt him. The sergeant threw off his vest and lit a cigar while he waited for Li Han to attack him. He was sure the private could not defeat him, so he took no weapons. Li Han was shocked that the sergeant did not take any weapons. He asked him why he was going to fight him with his bare hands, to which the sergeant replied that he had no need for weapons in a fight with a child. The sergeant said the rules were simple. If any part of his body, like his knees, touched the ground, then he could consider that he had won. Li Han asked what would happen if he lost, to which the sergeant replied that he would just accept it. Li Han smiled and replied that he was not satisfied with this option. He then began to prepare his attack. He swung his spear, demonstrating the skills he had developed while training with Sergeant Wei Cheng. Sergeant John Red was ready for his attack. The privates watching the fight thought Li Han was playing a trick on them when they saw his skills and realized that the guy was not bad, but they knew that the instructor was hardly a match for him. Del Simon, who was passing by, noticed a crowd of people standing at the window and actively discussing something. He decided to come and see what was going on, so he pushed the soldiers and asked them to let him pass. Simon saw that Li Han was going to fight the sergeant and thought he was crazy, but he was curious about what he could show in this fight, so he decided to stay and watch the battle. Li Han started attacking him, leaving all the talk behind. He didn't care about those who were watching them. He just wanted to show him that he was worthy of the title of class president and that he had already learned a lot in such a short time. He decided to attack him from above, thinking that this way he would be able to do damage to him. He struck him with his spear with all his might, but the sergeant blocked it. His attack did not reach its target, and he remained on his feet. The sergeant managed to catch him and unleashed his attack. He kicked him in the stomach with incredible force. Li Han realized that he had to free himself from his grip, otherwise he would be able to finish him off. But John Red himself released him from the hold, and when Li Han fell to the ground, he saw that he couldn't move and was ready to finish him. He approached him and attacked him. Li Han felt that he had to do something, or the fight would be over. Li Han successfully dodged the attack and moved away from him to a safe distance. He barely had time to dodge. The sergeant's blow was very strong and caused him a lot of damage, but it did not make him give up. He was ready to continue the fight. When he was at a safe distance, he was horrified to realize that the sergeant was about to finish him off. Li Han could barely contain his worry. He was sweating profusely and breathing heavily. The sergeant saw that it was all written on Li Han's face, and he was sure that the dragons and their controlled monsters would have killed him without hesitation in the first few minutes of the battle. He remembered the battles when the monsters were killing the soldiers individually. He told him that he was weak, but the monsters didn't care about that, and neither did he. The sergeant added that he would have known genuine fear when he had met them. Li Han leaned on his spear, interrupted him, and said he realized his weapon was his tongue. John Red was greatly surprised that he could rise. The sergeant didn't listen to him anymore and decided to continue the fight. He quickly approached him, grabbed his spear, and threw it against the ground again. He was pretty angry at the words he heard and started attacking him faster. Li Han fell to the ground, his head hitting the ground hard. This time, the sergeant did not hurry to finish him off. He waited for Li Han to get back on his feet, but he doubted that he would be able to do so. But suddenly, the sergeant noticed a cut on his cheek, which was inflicted on him by Li Han. John Red was confused and could not understand when the private had managed to injure him. Seeing that Li Han had managed to cut the sergeant, the other privates supported him fiercely. They wanted him to teach the sergeant a lesson, so that he would feel like he was in their shoes when he beat them up. Li Han was encouraged by his achievement and the fact that the other soldiers were supporting him. He took his spear and attacked again now that he was more confident in his strength and thought he could defeat the sergeant. The sergeant still easily dodged all of Li Han's attacks despite all of his failures. The sergeant thought that he needed to analyze all of his attacks, but suddenly he lost sight of him. Unexpectedly, Sergeant Li Han managed to confuse him, and he decided to take advantage of the fact that the sergeant didn't see him. He ran behind his back and swung his spear to launch his attack. But it wasn't as easy as he thought. The sergeant was able to react to his attack, showing his excellent reflexes. Still, Li Han didn't stop and continued to attack in hopes of knocking him to the ground. The sergeant noticed that he began to accelerate his body turns. He realized that it was not for nothing that Wei Chen praised this private. He looked at him and was excited about his new attack. John Red saw Li Han coming at him, and then the sergeant decided that he would not dodge his final blow and would take it on himself. He stood still, ready to feel the pain. He knew he could have died, but he wanted to test the strength of Private Li Han's punch, which had struck the sergeant with all his might. The sergeant stood on his feet. He pulled out a piece of spear from his chest and threw it towards Li Han. He saw that a red aura started to emanate from his body, and now he was already in great danger. He went to him, took him by the throat, and lifted him above him, telling him that this was the end of Li Han. The sergeant was too strong an opponent for him. After looking into his eyes, the sergeant ordered Li Han to surrender. He had no more chance to win because the sergeant started to use his fire ability and directed fire into his hand. From the pain, Li Han started to scream loudly, but he did not give up. Simon, who was watching through the window, began to worry about Li Han, thinking that the sergeant would finish him off. He thought it was too much, because Li Han was still a child and was not an equal opponent to the sergeant. The sergeant clenched his hand harder and harder and intensified the fire in his hand. He told him to surrender or he would kill him, but through pain and tears, Li Han shouted to him that there was no way he would surrender. Li Han screamed even harder, and suddenly Wei Chen appeared on the battlefield and immediately tried to stop Sergeant John Red, who was serious about finishing off Li Han. Wei Chen rushed to the aid of the private, who was already unconscious. He was already on the verge of death. The instructor ran and shouted for John Red to stop the fight. Otherwise, it could happen irreparably, and the guy would die. John Red let go of the private and he fell to the ground. John Red was upset that none of them had lost, and that was his biggest disappointment. He didn't care that Li Han needed urgent help. Instructor Wei picked the private up and was shocked that John Red had beaten him so severely. He looked at him and said that the organization's methods were getting on his nerves. He was pretty angry with the sergeant. John Red picked up his uniform, turned to the private standing behind him, and ordered them all to shut up immediately. He wanted them to listen carefully to whatever he was going to tell them. The instructor looked at them and said that since Li Han didn't give up in their fight, he recognized that he had won, but he added that all this pussyfooting around wouldn't do them any good. All the privates who watched their fight realized that Li Han fought honorably and showed everyone what he could. He was an excellent candidate for class president. Instructor Wei gently held Li Han in his arms. He was not pleased to see him in such a state. Sergeant John Red left and told him to move him to the B class when Li Han was back on his feet. The next day, the sergeant was walking down the hall and told the specialist that he would put Li Han on the B list of the class. She was surprised and told him that it was not often jumped over a whole level. She wondered how the class students would feel about it. He replied that he could have easily put him in the A class, but his psycho abilities were still not high enough. She realized that this was precisely what the high-level privates cared about most. The sergeant replied that they were all deeply mistaken. In the battle with dragons, it was not so much the notorious psycho abilities that were important as the great willpower to look fear in the face and thrust a spear or a sword into the enemy's weak spot. He added that Li Han had willpower, so he would be the best striker. It was unacceptable to dismiss such a talented candidate just because of the slow development of psycho abilities. The sergeant said that he may be the world's savior in the future. The girl was shocked and said that it was the first time she had heard him speak of someone with such admiration that she thought he had only hatred for him. John Red didn't understand what she was saying to him. Still, he answered her by saying he liked Li Han, a talented and capable private who never gave up and only went forward. A week later, the instructor visited the hospital to visit Li Han, but he could not dare enter the room. When the nurse saw him, he asked if he would go in or if he was still standing by the door. In front of the door stood Instructor Wei, who was caught by the nurse near the door. He smiled and nodded his head positively. He was a little confused and did not expect that she would have caught him near the door. The nurse saw that Instructor Wei had brought something with him. He asked him what it was, and he said it was nothing special. He had just got the private a small gift. She came closer to him and suggested that he enter the room and finally see his subordinate. She wondered why he hadn't entered the room. Wei scratched his head and decided to show her the reason. He led her to the window in the chamber door and pointed her to Li Han, who was practicing using his psycho powers. He added that he didn't want to interrupt him, so he waited until he finished. Li Han was incredibly focused. He tried his best to hold a drop of water in the air, but he struggled to lift it and properly utilize his psycho abilities. He did not waste time. Even after his injuries, he continued to train. Watching through the window, the nurse and Instructor Wei were pleased that the young talent had succeeded. Instructor Wei noted that the young private was just a matter of concentration and was uncomfortable standing next to the nurse and decided to say something. The nurse realized he was shy and suggested he go to the room. He entered the room where Li Han had already finished his training session. He was happy to see him and said they hadn't seen each other in a long time. The instructor asked him how he was feeling and if he was okay. Li Han smiled back at him. He was glad to see him too. He told him that, thanks to him, he was okay. He came to his rescue in time and stopped Sergeant John Red. Instructor Wei set his basket on the floor and informed him that he had brought him something to snack on. He started pulling out the food he had brought for him. Li Han thanked him for his concern. He laid out the food for him and told him that tomorrow was his first day in the B class. He was very glad that Li Han was having a good time and trying to develop psychokinesis to become the best psyker in the organization. Li Han replied that his mental level was still below average, and he thought practicing this ability before discharge would be a good idea. Instructor Wei peeled an apple and said it was a wise decision because the psyker had to be skillful in combat and proficient in psychokinesis. He explained to him that most battles were fought in the air, and if a warrior dropped his weapon, he had to get it back somehow, or he would lose the battle much faster. The instructor suddenly had a brilliant idea. He left the room and went to the nurse. He asked her to let them go. She was shocked and didn't understand where they were going so late, to which Wei replied that they were literally there and back. Li Han didn't understand why the instructor had taken him from the hospital. They entered a room with no light. Li Han looked around and realized where he had taken him. He asked him why they had come to the training room. Instructor Wei said that based on the slow development of his psycho abilities, he could conclude that the probability of awakening the trait was negligible. He explained to him that the other psychers were capable of starting fires or teleporting. He turned to him and said that he had to forget about it. It would be best for him. Wei realized that he was wondering how he was supposed to fight. Then everything was simple. He needed to concentrate on training psychokinesis, which would become his trait. Li Han listened to him carefully, tried to memorize everything he told him, and noted that he needed to concentrate on developing his psychokinesis. The instructor was showing him his abilities with psychokinesis. He added that psycho abilities were like muscles, and the more he used and trained them, the stronger they became. He said that the initial level of possession of psycho abilities was just an illusion. He said that their generation, compared to their generation, had more potential. Instructor Wei looked at him and with a smile told him not to dare to give up. He asked him to continue to train hard. He believed that a great future awaited him, and he had high hopes for him. Li Han, highlighting his aura, promised to continue training and would not let down his instructor, who believed in him more than he believed in himself. Li Han was very happy that Wei had instilled confidence in his own abilities. The next day, Li Han was discharged from the hospital. He had recovered and was ready to start his new class. He stood in front of the door and couldn't decide whether to enter the classroom. He tried to tune in before entering the room. He exhaled deeply and calmly decided to enter the classroom. Still, as soon as he turned around, he flew into a passing student heading to the same class as Li Han. The guy Li Han hit didn't expect that someone would dare to hit him. He couldn't forgive it, but when he saw Li Han hit him, he couldn't believe his eyes that he was in front of him. Li Han, wiping his nose, was greatly surprised that he knew his name. The guy laughed hard and replied that in their class, everyone knew about him and he had become popular in the organization. The guy extended his hand and said he was glad they had met. He was the class president, Dmitry Vladimirovich. Petrov Li Han extended his hand and asked if he had a slightly shorter name. He replied that he could just call him Dmitry. He hoped they would get along, to which Li Han replied that he too hoped they would get along. They shook hands and smiled at each other. Dmitry said he was just in time for their martial arts class, and he turned around and went to the gym, calling him after him. As he entered the gym, he thought that martial arts was the best kind of training for him, suffocating in a routine of constant worry about his low psycho abilities and anxiety that he could be kicked out at any moment, and now he could be distracted. Li Han picked up the spear and realized that he could finally breathe easily in armed combat. He considered such activities a balm for soul fighting, and he forgot about all his problems. He noticed that some privates were bullying his friend. He took a spear and beat them all. He could not let them bully him. He always tried to act justly and protect the weak. Li Han stood over them and asked if they had fun beating up Kuro, who was huddled on the ground and trembling with fear. He was not physically stronger than them and did not possess a martial art. He added that Kuro's trait was psycho ability. He once again asked them if they had fun humiliating someone who wasn't as strong physically, but the privates couldn't answer. Li Han beat them, so they couldn't get up. Li Han added that if psychic powers could be used in fights, Kuro would not let them escape it. Li Han was sure that he looked furious. Dmitry was quite impressed that Li Han easily defeated the other students. He realized that he was not mistaken when he saw him for the first time. Now, he wanted only one thing: to fight him. Kuro was lying on the floor and couldn't get up. His classmates were arguing over who would beat him up next. They knew he couldn't resist them. They were stronger than him, and he had nowhere to go for help. They were happy when they bullied Kuro. They threw him a sword and asked him to attack them. They mocked and humiliated him. He could do nothing but cry. Kuro called for help and begged them to leave him alone, but nothing helped. He wished that Lee Han would show up and save him. He knew he was his friend, and he wouldn't leave him in trouble. He only thought of him as all of his classmates suddenly fell in front of him. Kuro hoped that he didn't think he was imagining it, and Lee Han really appeared in front of him, quickly dispatching them. Lee Han was incredibly angry. He looked at Dmitri and shouted at him that now he understood what kind of training matches they had in this class. For him, it was unacceptable. He could not afford to humiliate the weak. Dmitri scratched his head and smiled at him. He said that such were the methods of organization. The enemies would not spare the weaklings and would destroy them first without thinking. He explained that Lee Han was superfluous because if he kept getting him out of trouble, he'd doom him to death, and he needed to learn to stand up for himself. Lee Han clenched his fist and thought he had nothing to say to Dmitri. He was right, and Lee Han realized it, but he couldn't back down because he had beaten up all his classmates in front of the president. Dmitri turned to those who were bullying Kuro and said it was stupid for the three of them to bully one weakling. They could have attacked the weak Kuro one by one, but they had already been punished for that. He looked at Lee Han and said that he had to show everyone present what a real duel was, and he wanted him to fight him. Lee Han picked up a spear and asked him if he wanted to try to defeat him. Dmitri starts to attack Lee Han with all his might, but his attacks are repulsed by his spear, and at some point, he realizes that if he has to block another blow, his spear might break. Lee Han realized that Dmitri was superior to him in physical strength. Hence, he decided to repel his attack so that he would lose his balance and then be able to launch his attack. When he blocked the blow, Dmitri started to fall forward, and Lee Han decided it was the perfect moment to attack. He tried to hit him with his spear without approaching him. Lee Han barely managed to touch his cheek with his spear. Dmitri dodged the attack and started to attack him back, but he didn't use his weapon. He wanted to strike him with his head. He didn't expect that Dmitri wouldn't use his sword and strike his head. He thought they were having an armed duel. Lee Han was lying on the ground and holding his head. His attack had hurt him. Dmitri said that he should not only keep an eye on his sword. He told him that he started Sambo as soon as he learned to walk, so if he caught him, he would break all his bones. Lee Han leaned on his spear and started to rise. He listened to Dmitri and was not afraid of his threats. Ironically, he asked him if he was going to break the bones of dragons. Dmitri gripped his sword more firmly and told him he would try to strangle the dragon when he realized he was in great danger and had no other choice. Classmates were excited about their fight. He supported their president and wanted him to defeat Lee Han. They asked him to tear him a Siberian tiger cub. They were sure that Dmitri would defeat Lee Han. Dmitri turned to them and, with a smile on his face, asked them to shove their diminutive and affectionate name far away. He thought it looked really awful and didn't want them to keep talking like that. Lee Han was shocked when he saw them talking to each other. They insulted each other, but no one was offended. They just laughed. Dmitri asked them to shut up and let him concentrate. He realized that their friendship was strong, and Dmitri was the main link in their company. He realized that Kuro didn't fit into their company. He was completely different, so he was considered a weakling. Dmitri noticed that Lee Han was looking at Kuro and rushed to attack him. He shouted at him not to dare turn away from his opponent because it could cost him his life in a real fight. Lee Han successfully blocked his spear again. They attacked each other repeatedly, but all their attacks were blocked and no one could hit the target. So Lee Han decided that there was no point in continuing this fight, and decided to end it with his strongest attack. Lee Han broke his spear with his attack, and he also broke Dmitri's sword. He suddenly realized that he had been trying to break his spear from the beginning by hitting it throughout the fight, but he didn't understand why he was doing it. As soon as their weapons were broken, Dmitri attacked him with his bare hands. He used his Sambo skills and threw Lee Han over his hip. He fell, and Dmitri gave him a painful hold on his arm. Dmitri offered him to surrender. He said he had nothing else to do but surrender if he wanted to walk around with a whole arm. All the classmates were happy for their president. Lee Han looked at him and told him not to pull. If he was not weak enough, he tried to break his arm, so Dmitri was quite amazed that he did not want to give up, even in this position. Dmitri realized that he had no other choice, and he broke his arm. Everyone around him was shocked and did not expect that Lee Han would not surrender. Dmitri looked at him and said that he had offered him to surrender, but now he was even ashamed. He turned away to look at his class. He added that you had to give him credit for not giving up and whining over a broken arm, and he recognized his resilience. He turned his back to him and told the others to take Li Han to the doctor, but he didn't see Li Han standing behind him and holding a spear in his hand, preparing to strike him. Li Han threw a punch, and Dmitri was unconscious. He told him that it appeared that all his opponents before him were the same whiners crying over one fracture, but he was completely different. He saw that Dmitri did not react to his words, and then Li Han shouted for him to get up. He thought that their fight was not over yet, but Dmitri could not get up. He hit him too hard on the head. Dmitri woke up in the hospital. He did not understand what had happened and why he was there. He did not remember the moment of the blow and that Li Han had hit him on the head with a spear. He was very confused. He noticed that Li Han was in the same room with him with a broken arm. Li Han looked at his watch and saw that he had received a new video message, which he immediately opened. The general who sent him to the organization left him a video message. He said it was incredible that he exceeded all expectations. He added that, as he promised, his family was in good health, and he could not worry about them. Li Han could barely hold back the tears. He was happy that his family was okay. The general said that, as proof of his words, next time, he would send him a video of them together. The general sent him some pictures so he could see that they were okay and he could focus on training. He said goodbye to him, and the video ended. Li Han saw they were all well, some even a little fat, and he was emotional. He hadn't seen his family for a long time, and these pictures were like a breath of fresh air for him. He noticed that Dmitri had come to his senses and asked him to flip to the next photo. He couldn't do it himself. Dmitri didn't understand what was happening, but still agreed to help him. Dmitri flipped through the picture, but he wondered why he had asked him to do that in the first place, and Li Han showed him his broken arm, which he had broken himself. He said that because of him, he now had a crack in the back of his head. He was angry because he had hit him from behind like the last coward, but Li Han replied that it was his own fault. He had turned his back on his opponent, and he himself had told him about the organization's methods. Li Han told him he wanted to know he was in a bad mood but had nothing against him. He didn't want them to become enemies because they would study together. Dmitri replied that he had no complaints against him. He smiled and offered to fight properly next time so that their duel would be fair. Li Han said that maybe he had done wrong to Kuro, but he should have just been there for him instead of fighting with his abusers, because he needed to learn to stand up for himself. Dmitri listened to him and said he understood his feelings. He said it was possible that they could not have survived even a sophomore year. Li Han did not realize what Dmitri was telling him. But he didn't explain anything. He asked him to follow him. They left the room, and Li Han asked where they were going, to which Dmitri replied that it was better for him to see for himself. They came to the emergency medical floor. Li Han asked why they came to this floor. Dmitri said it was where he was considered alive as long as he could still breathe. Suddenly, right in front of them, the doctors brought to the floor a student who was very severely injured. He was barely alive. They tried to save him and took him to the operating room for immediate care. Li Han was horrified when he saw such a mangled body. He asked Dmitri what was going on here, who could beat up a student so severely. He was shocked when he saw all this. Doctors tried to act as quickly as possible to save the patient. They wanted to find out how complicated his training program was that he was now in such a state. Li Han looked at the injured man carefully and asked Dmitri if they were his age. He had seen this man before and was sure he was not older than them, but now he looked like a grown man. He looked at Dmitri and realized that he was also quite tall compared to him. When they first met, Li Han had thought he was more like an instructor than a student. Dmitri didn't quite understand why Li Han was looking at him like that. He scratched his head and decided he needed to explain why he looked like that. He told him that when he went to the second course, the privates were given a special drug. He added that this drug accelerated the growth and physical growth of the average adult male, who was much tougher, but the real reason was something else. Li Han was shocked and couldn't believe it when he found out. Dmitri smiled and said they would be killing dragons in 3 years and had to be ready to fight an adult and mighty dragon that could kill them. He explained that no one would wait until all the privates in the organization would grow up naturally. Hence, They developed a drug that accelerated the process several times. Li Han replied that it was just fine. Dmitri couldn't understand what he meant, so he explained to him that he had always wanted to grow up faster and had his own reasons. He remembered the days when he would go to great lengths to survive, stealing bags from passing adults to feed his family, and no one else cared for them. Li Han said that every time he had to fight with adult men who did not spare him and beat him very severely, they did not care that he was a child. He could not fight back. They were much stronger than him physically. He said he didn't need a happy childhood. He knew that the most important thing was to survive, and he would be happy to get this drug and get stronger so he could be on par with the adult psychers. Dmitri listened to him carefully, then exhaled and said that against the background of the others in the organization, he had an iron character, which made him stand out from the crowd of other privates. Li Han lowered his head and didn't pay much attention to Dmitri's words. He was thinking about something and suggested that he go back to the room. He had already seen everything he wanted to see, and now he knew a little more than the others. The next day, Sergeant Red informed all the enlisted men that this was the day their airborne training began. He said it was a test exam that would show the level of their training. He asked them to remember that everything they had learned here was important. John Red added that they were moving out in 16 hours and 30 minutes, and before heading out, they needed to thoroughly check their gear. Dmitri, checking his equipment, said that they had just returned from the hospital and were already waiting for a training session in the air. He looked at Li Han and asked if he missed his hospital bed, but Li Han was not thinking about it now. He was focused on the mission. Li Han, checking his gear, noticed a strange detail as he looked at his backpack. He asked Dmitri if he had noticed that their bags were filled to the top with rations. He added that this wasn't just the usual training the sergeant was talking about. He was sure they were in for a very tough challenge, but he wasn't sure what was bothering him. Dmitri looked around him and saw that some had already started eating their food, not realizing it could save their lives. They thought the task would be quite short. Suddenly he spotted Del Simon. He pushed Li Han to warn him that he too was with them on the mission, but he didn't care. He wanted to thoroughly check his gear. Del Simon didn't pay attention to anyone. He was focused and very calm. He didn't care that everyone was looking at him and discussing that he was going on a mission with them. Dmitri knew that he was the last genius of Great Britain. He recognized him, after which he said that he would have liked to fight him and teach him a good lesson. But right now, they didn't have time for that. Del Simon turned around and saw Dmitri and Li Han looking at him. He didn't understand why they were acting so strangely at him, but they were far away from him, and he didn't go near them. Li Han saw Kuro, who, as usual, sat apart from everyone and thought about what he was thinking. He was worried about him, but he couldn't help but think about his friend and how to protect him. He couldn't let him get kicked out of the organization for failing the mission. The time allotted for them to check their gear was up, and they were approached by Sergeant Red, who shouted at them to stop chilling. It was time for them to get up and run aboard. All the privates put on their helmets, took their gear, and ran to the military plane, which had been waiting for them for a long time. On board, they were met by a sergeant who made sure that everyone got on board. The military planes took off, and the air mission began. Sergeant Red told the others that it was time for them to leave, too. He thought it was the last time they would babysit these suckers. Kuro recalled that at first, there was only the image of Li Han, and then he came to life. He saved him by beating all his abusers. He always protected him and helped him in difficult situations. He hung on the tree and cried. He realized that now, no matter how much he waited for him, Li Han did not appear in front of him, which meant that this time, he would not save him from realizing this. Kuro cried even more. An hour before Kuro hit the tree, they flew by their organization. They didn't realize how long they still had to fly, and some of them noticed that the organization from this height seemed just tiny. Li Han noticed on his watch that they were now flying over an uninhabited island, and right after they landed, they would start practicing their island survival skills. Sergeant Red, along with the other sergeants, were already on the island sitting in the boats. He informed them that the food in each of the bags would last them for 2 days, after which they were to proceed at their discretion. After receiving the notifications on board, some of the enlisted men panicked and couldn't understand why the survival training had suddenly started. They weren't prepared to spend 2 days on a deserted island. Dmitri looked at them and told them to calm down. It was fun. He took the assignment as if they had all decided to go camping. He was not worried or scared at all. Suddenly, Sergeant Red added that they would be back in exactly 7 days. They turned around and sailed off the island. Now they had to survive there for a whole week. The next day, Sergeant Red fished a private out of the water who had almost died. He turned around and asked his aide if this was the last loser to be in the water. His assistant looked at the map and told him that it was the last one. All the others were still on the island, and their mission continued, but they were getting fewer and fewer. Some of them were panicking and didn't know how to survive on the island. Sergeant Red said that each acted alone, relying only on their strength. The deputy added that, at first, they did, but 7 of them had already grouped together to work together. He was well aware that they were not innocent children. They were just like adults. He understood why they had joined together and what awaited the others, but he could not interfere. They had to survive the week on their own. The sergeant added that when the restrictions were removed from them, then they decided everything by force. He said, why starve all together when you could take food from the weak? The privates joined forces to make it easier to take food from the weak. They beat them up and thanked them for the food, saying what they would think of him when they ate it. They opened the bags and were amazed that some had not yet had time to eat anything. They began to divide the spoils, and one of them looked at them and told them to remember to leave food for their leader. He turned to him and asked him to come over to them and look at their catch. Their leader was a private they called Carl. He looked at them menacingly, calling them idiots. He said they were commanded to take as much food as they could before sundown. Carl got up and walked over to them. He wondered if they knew what he had arranged all this for. He said it wasn't just to do the infamous food sharing later. He delighted in taking food from the weak and forcing them to leave the organization and this desert island. He told his subordinates that they would continue plundering, and then no one else would dare poke their noses in. He saw the happy faces of his team, who were encouraged by his speech. They answered him that if Dimitri or Li Han tried to defy them, they could defeat not only them, but even Della Simon himself. Suddenly, he heard someone asking for help. He turned around and realized that the sound was coming from the woods. Someone was calling loudly for help. Carl realized that he could not miss such an opportunity for robbery and that they should go there. Carl picked up his backpack and told his subordinates to do the same. He said it was time to go on their way. Their prey began to call them. They packed up and headed for the place where the sound was coming from. On the island, a private who was upset that he had fallen into the water survived and managed to land on his own, but it was not easy. Li Han stepped onto the dry land, and the first thing he thought was that he had already lost too much time. He looked around and realized that he was easily detected here and needed to go deeper into the forest. He decided to find shelter before he got trapped. Li Han walked through the bushes and realized that for those who had never known hunger, 2 weeks' rations would not be enough, and they would not be able to survive long without food. Li Han thought that in a critical situation, they could start robbing other cadets. He wondered if the likes of Simon had ever gone hungry and had to survive without food and other conditions. Del Simon found that Dimitri was following him. He stopped and asked why he was following him. Del Simon noticed that he kept his eyes on him even before they were sent to the desert island. He didn't realize what goal he wanted to achieve. Dimitri looked mad. He answered that he was following him because he wanted him to fight him. He knew he was brilliant, so he wanted to test his fighting ability. Del Simon listened to him, then turned around and started to walk away. He said that he didn't want to waste his strength and fight him. He had another task he needed to survive. Dimitri was shocked that he had just walked away and asked him to stop. Dimitri saw that he didn't stop and kept walking away. Then he yelled that he didn't mean anything bad. He just wanted to compare their fighting abilities. Del Simon looked at him, thinking he was a bit silly. Dimitri put on his backpack and said that he knew it was too sudden for him. He added that when they got to know each other better, they would be able to measure their strength and skills. The sun was setting on the island, and at that moment, Carl and his team almost reached the place where they heard sounds and cries for help. When they came closer, they saw who was shouting. They saw Kuro in the tree with his parachute tangled in the branches, asking them to help him. He had almost no strength left, and he had been in the tree for a long time. Carl and the team started laughing at him, but they were not surprised when they saw him. Carl saw his food bag lying on the ground and he took it for himself, saying it was very cool that Kuro didn't have time to eat anything. He thanked him for it, and they were going to leave, leaving him in the tree. They wished him good luck and went on to search for their prey. Kuro asked them to stop. He said that since they had taken his bag, they could at least take him down from the tree. He couldn't free himself from the trap. Carl explained to him that if he hadn't been hanging from the tree, he would not only have been robbed, but also beaten up. He could consider himself lucky, so he could continue to hang quietly from the tree and wait for help from the instructors. They kept laughing with him. Carl added that he did not worry about starving him. He wouldn't die in a week, but he wasn't sure about that. Then they left, leaving him in the tree without food. Kuro heard him tell him that it would rain soon and he wouldn't die of thirst, but he wasn't certain that his words were true. Kuro thought it was too much for him. He was left alone with his problem. He did nothing but cry even harder and hoped for help. He remembered all those who had wronged him and could not understand if he deserved to be treated like that. Kuro recalled how he was told that they were annoyed to listen to his sniffles and asked him to shut up. He didn't understand why he was treated like that. He was in tears, hysterical, and couldn't calm down and pull himself together. He realized that his strength was running out, and he was slowly starting to lose consciousness. Kuro lost hope that someone would help him and free him from the trap, but suddenly he saw the silhouette of Lee Han, who was coming to his rescue. Kuro said his name again, but after a moment the silhouette dissolved in front of him. He realized that he had imagined it, and that Lee Han had not come to save him. He realized that his strength had left him, and he hung silently on the tree. But suddenly his hallucination turned into reality, and in front of him really appeared Lee Han, who was just walking deep into the forest. He raised his head to see what was on the tree. Lee Han set up his tent and tried to camouflage it with foliage. He didn't want anyone to accidentally bump into them. He sat by the tent and sharpened his spear. He knew how to survive on this island. Kuro came out of the tent and couldn't believe his eyes that Lee Han was sitting in front of him. He was already unconscious when he saved him from the tree and didn't remember how he woke up in the tent. Lee Han turned around and saw that Kuro was already awake. He smiled at him and continued sharpening his spear. Kuro was glad that he had found him and saved him, but he didn't understand how he had managed to get him out of the tree. Lee Han suggested that he talk about everything over breakfast. He explained to Kuro that he could not return his supplies and offered to split his food between them. Kuro was at a loss for words and was not comfortable eating Lee Han. Kuro realized that he was uncomfortable accepting food from Lee Han. He told him that his supplies were barely enough for one person, and he didn't want to become a burden to him. He pushed the plate away and wanted to refuse the food. He thought he should have said he was refusing food, but he was just starving and started to eat very greedily. He ate and thought he was an idiot and a pathetic loser, but he needed the food. Kuro was very grateful to Lee Han for saving him and for sharing his food with him. He realized that others would never have helped him. Lee Han always came to his aid when he was in great danger. Lee Han said that after tomorrow they had to go out to look for water. They needed something to drink, otherwise they would have a hard time. They didn't realize that reconnaissance drones were approaching them. Reconnaissance drones were all over the desert island, watching all the privates who were on a mission. They didn't see that they were being watched. Sergeant Red was watching from the observation room. He was smoking a cigar and could control their every move and action. If they were in a death trap, he could save them. A specialist entered the observation room where Sergeant Red was sitting and reminded him that smoking was not allowed in this building. The sergeant turned around, took a deep drag of cigar smoke, and asked him to shut up. The specialist noted that his room was quite atmospheric. Even though he was sitting alone and in total darkness, he asked if anyone was interesting from the ranks. Sergeant Red asked him to come closer to him so he could see all the information on the screen. Sergeant Red smiled and added that one private had gone crazy and showed him on the screen. The private put a basket on his head and said that no one in their right mind was going to sit on a desert island for a week. He added that the point of the mission was to survive, and that was exactly what he was going to do. He wasn't going to wait to be robbed or beaten. He built himself a raft and decided that if he returned to the organization, it would be considered a completed mission. He prepared the raft, got on it, and returned to the organization. Lee Han and Kuro had breakfast and went in search of drinking water in the forest. They came across a spring with water. Lee Han took a bottle and was the first to taste it. He looked at Kuro and said that now they would quench their thirst and take some water with them. The sun had already risen too high, making walking on the island unbearable. Li Han said it would be difficult for them to move around during the day and suggested that they go back to the shelter. Li Han realized that if they wanted to survive, they needed to find more food. He wondered what on this island could be found. He didn't even see coconut palms, but Kuro didn't listen to him. Something strange was happening to him. He was about to make his next move, but Kuro quickly ran up to him, tugged his shoulder, and asked him to stop immediately. Li Han looked at him and couldn't understand what was happening or why he couldn't go any further. Li Han stepped on a twig, and the ground in front of him fell. He almost fell into a trap. He said that if he had fallen into it, he might not have gotten hurt, but it would have taken him a long time to get out. He turned to Kuro and asked him how he knew there was a trap right before him. Kuro couldn't explain it, and then Li Han thought that he had been able to foresee it. Kuro said that he saw a smoking image instead of boiling it and began to explain to him how it happened. Li Han realized that it was not his style to speak in metaphors. He realized that Kuro was speaking in the literal sense of what he saw. Li Han realized that his trait had manifested. He could see the future a few seconds ahead. Li Han knew that this was one of the strongest and rarest abilities, and it was in the weak Kuro. They walked to the shelter while Li Han is silent and thinking about something. Li Han analyzes the situation and realizes that the extreme conditions on the island have triggered the ability's awakening. He looked at Kuro carefully and thought this training was an excellent opportunity to showcase his abilities. Still, Kuro couldn't understand what Li Han was thinking. While Li Han and Kuro were trying to get back to their shelter, the unknown privates found their place and decided to look inside the tent and deal with whoever was in it. It was Carl and his team. They decided that now they could get more products after dealing with their enemies. Carl looked into the tent, but it was empty. He looked around and realized that there were 2 people living in it. He noticed 2 plates that someone had recently eaten breakfast off of, but there were no backpacks in the tent, and he realized that they had taken them with them so that no one could steal them in their absence. Carl's subordinate, shaking his fists, offered to break the tent down and level it, but Carl was more brilliant than that. He knew they'd still return to the place, and he thought they'd just gone to get supplies so he didn't break the tent down. Carl decided that now was not the time to announce his presence near this tent. He told his subordinates that they would soon visit them again, and then take them by surprise. Kuro was the last to arrive at the tent. He said that he wanted to lie down and rest from the unbearable heat, but Li Han agreed. Li Han asked Kuro to stop. He realized that someone was there and was absolutely sure of it because he found the stone he had left on the tent's fabric. But now the stone was lying on the ground next to the tent. Li Han discovered more footprints and realized 2 had come close to the tent while the others waited. Li Han approached Kuro and said that if all these guys were in on it, there was a good chance they could take away all their stuff. He told Kuro to roll up the tarp, but they had to leave that place. Kuro finished assembling the tarp near sunset. They took all their belongings and set off to find a new place to sleep. They didn't have much time until it was completely dark on the island. Li Han asked Kuro if he could foresee anything, if there was a trap ahead. Kuro replied that something strange was happening to him, and his eyes began to close. But all this was for a reason. While Li Han was trying to shout to him and wake him up, Kuro had a vision that a huge panther was preparing to attack Li Han, who suspected nothing. He saw that in just a few seconds, the panther would pounce on Li Han the first and kill him. It used the moment of surprise and was able to attack him successfully. Kuro quickly came back to reality and pushed away Li Han, who collapsed to the ground. The panther was unable to attack her target. She missed, but now they were both in great danger. The panther looked directly at Li Han, showing him his huge fangs. They were serious and ready to fight. Li Han looked around and realized that he had dropped his weapon and had nothing to defend himself with. She rushed at him with a powerful attack. He didn't know what to do. He wouldn't be able to overpower her. He closed his eyes briefly, but suddenly saw the panther being attacked by a fire shot. He couldn't understand who had used his ability to save him. When the panther was defeated, Li Han heard a familiar voice asking if they were okay. Li Han turned his head to see his president, Jose, who had just saved his life. Jose was happy to see him. He noticed that Kuro was with him. When the fire cleared, Li Han noticed that his leg was bandaged. He asked him what had happened to him and what was wrong with his leg. He smiled and explained to them that some freak had set traps all over the island. He had fallen into one of them because of the injury he had sustained. and now he couldn't even stand properly. Li Han and Kuro were shocked by his appearance. Jose sat beside them and said he was lucky to have stumbled upon them, or Li Han would have been dead from the paws of a wild panther. Kuro said that they too had seen the same trap. Li Han confirmed this and added that it was probably the work of the same person who had decided to hunt them down. Jose smiled and said that he had heard that there were thieves on the island. He added that at least he had nothing to steal. He was without his food and backpack. They couldn't understand how this could have happened. They asked him what had happened to him, that he had lost all his belongings and food. Jose laughed and said that he had eaten everything right after hurting his leg, so he wouldn't be robbed. Li Han looked at him and couldn't understand whether Jose was always this stupid, but now they needed to find a place to sleep, and before they had time to talk, the night was falling. The night came, and while everyone slept, Carl sat by the fire and remembered the moment when he found out that he had psycho powers. He was very young and didn't even know about them. His father leaned over to him and told him that the sensors at the airport activated as soon as he walked in, which meant he had psycho powers that no one in their family knew anything about but him. His father told him this was his chance to get into the organization and become a Saker. Carl replied that he was in the middle of shooting a movie and didn't want to give it up. Carl's words enraged his father, and he grabbed him and told him that when he became a Saker, he would finally stop doing such nonsense and would be able to gain unparalleled fame and fortune. Dad said that when the war was over, the Psykers would become the nation's soldiers. He raved that he would become a superhuman who commanded every man in the country. The next day, Carl was near the organization's building. He did not want to study and train here at all. He wanted to continue making movies. He liked it very much, but he could not cross his father, and now he had to study in the organization. While on the island, Dmitri did not forget about his training. He started doing one-arm push-ups while Del Simon watched and ate. He could not understand why Dmitri was wasting his energy. Del Simon finished his candy bar and told Dmitri they had very little food left and a long way to go on the island. He wondered how Dmitri planned to survive the remaining 5 days. Dmitri, needing his muscles, told him that it was his body structure. He explained to him that to become an elite striker, he had to keep himself in good physical shape. Del Simon was upset to hear his response, and he told Dmitri that he had been foolish. He added that in battle, the Psykers used their psychic powers rather than their physical strength, which might not be enough to fight a dragon. Dmitri covered his face with his hands and told him that he was beginning to miss Li Han because it looked like he was the only one capable of defeating him in a gunfight. Del Simon bought his provocation and demonstrated his abilities by exuding an aura. He looked at Dmitri and asked if he and Li Han had fought in a duel, curious how their fight ended. Dmitri was very happy that he was able to provoke him. He was already anticipating their fight. He was mentally grateful to Li Han because, thanks to him, Dmitri could get the long-awaited fight. Li Han, Kuro, and Jose managed to find a safe place to sleep. They found a small cave, camouflaged it, built a fire, and stayed there until morning. In the morning, Li Han greeted his comrades and suggested they stay together for the rest of the training session. He and Kuro would go out to look for firewood and food. Jose couldn't move because of his injury. Li Han said that since he couldn't move and get out of the shelter, he would stay inside and guard it from anyone who dared to attack him. Jose replied that they didn't have to worry, he would be up to the task. Jose apologized for not being able to help them get firewood and food, but Li Han answered that it was no big deal. His fire ability could guarantee them an advantage. Li Han assured them that with the fire, the problem with supplies no longer seemed so serious to him. He took Kuro, and they went fishing. He wanted to catch some fish so they could have breakfast. They stood near the lake, and Kuro looked at him. He couldn't understand how they could fish if they didn't even have fishing rods. He didn't know if they could catch fish with their bare hands. Li Han looked at Kuro and thanked him, but he couldn't understand why he thanked him. Li Han explained to him that he had saved Kuro's life the previous day, and that he had managed to find shelter for them. He confessed to him that at first he thought helping him was the only right thing to do, but then he realized it wasn't, and he was completely confused. Li Han added that over the past few days on the desert island, he had seen that Kuro was a true psycho genius. He was much stronger than he thought and would surely become even stronger. He said that was why he was strong enough to save himself and himself. Li Han looked at him and said that from now until the end, they had to protect each other because they were friends. Kuro was struck by Li Han's words and remembered the days before he met him in an orphanage in Japan. He was just a child who didn't even have his own name and was called Kuro only because of the dark color of his skin. He was pleased that he finally had a friend who believed in him. Kuro realized he couldn't let him down and did everything he could to help him. Kuro began to emit a lot of aura. He was encouraged by the words of Li Han, who, looking at him, said that it was incredible. He was even cooler than he thought, and now he just needed to use it correctly. He understood what Li Han meant. He leaned toward the lake and directed his aura into the water, using it to detect the fish. He could see it clearly. Li Han understood that Kuro was a genius who had mastered psychokinesis even before joining the organization. If they combined his gift of foresight with psychokinesis, they would easily catch fish without any equipment. Kuro concentrated and thought about how he could catch the fish using psychokinesis. He tracked down a potential target and shouted to Li Han that now was the time to use his ability. He succeeded and pulled the fish out of the lake. They had already been practicing their survival skills for 3 days and were on their way back to the shelter. Li Han told him that he had done well today, had managed to catch 8 fish, and thought it was a miracle. Kuro smiled and said that Jose would be happy to see how many fish they could catch, to which Li Han replied that Jose's stomach was definitely wider than theirs and he ate a lot. They were almost near their shelter, but suddenly the sun came out and they covered themselves with their hands. Kuro noticed it had become very hot but couldn't understand why. Li Han realized the problem and told Kuro to stay where he was and wait for him to call. Kuro ran straight down the mountain, throwing away all the fish he had caught. He dashed to the shelter and saw that its entrance had been destroyed. He ran closer and found Jose lying on the ground, who did not move. Li Han could not understand who had done such a cruel thing to him. Dimitri threw one of his swords to his opponent, Del Simon, who had succumbed to his provocations. Now the long-awaited moment had come for Dimitri to fight him. Del Simon realized that Dimitri had guessed that this wasn't just airborne training, or he wouldn't have brought 2 swords. He realized Dimitri was prepared to be attacked, so he got his weapons. Dimitri answered that he just wanted to learn how to fight with a gun in both hands. He thought it looked very cool. When asked why he agreed to fight him, he said it was just for fun. Del Simon replied that if he and Li Han were really fighting on equal terms, then it meant that his full name was Dmitry Vladimirovich Petrov, the president of the B class. He was shocked that he knew who he was. He added that he had heard that Dmitry was being transferred to his class and wanted to see if he was worthy of it. Del Simon had gotten into a fighting stance and was ready to begin the battle. Dmitry used his psycho ability and covered his entire body with an aura. He replied to him that he was simply excellent for their class, offered to start the fight, and rushed at him with an attack. He tried to give him a sharp blow, but Del Simon decided to duck and avoid a direct attack. Dmitry thought it was bad that if he stopped suddenly, he wouldn't be able to reach him with his sword. Del Simon successfully counterattacked, and his sword jabbed into Dmitry's chest. Del Simon looked at him and asked if that was all he could do, but Dmitry wouldn't give up. Dmitry swung his sword sharply, causing him to retreat. Then Dmitry said that increasing the distance between them only improved him. He mercilessly launched attack after attack, trying to close the distance and finish him off. Still, Del Simon deftly dodged his attempts to strike him and continued to defend himself from a safe distance. Dmitry swung his sword, completely forgetting about his defense. He didn't see Del Simon dodge and move sharply behind him, where he was about to slay him with a single blow. He didn't expect to be so good at martial arts. Dmitry managed to avoid a stab in the back from him, and then he decided that he should have fought him more carefully. Dmitry once again rushed to attack and decided that this time he would be able to defeat the last genius of Great Britain. He swung and thought that this was his previous attack, after which Del Simon could not continue the fight. But Del Simon used his psycho powers and, with the help of telekinesis, struck a blow to Dmitry's head, from which he collapsed to the ground unconscious. The duel was over, and he failed to defeat the genius. Del Simon, fixing his hair, said he would have beaten him in a fair armed fight, but they were smokers. He told him that, so he used all his skills in the battle with him. He wondered if Li Han was stronger than Dmitry. Li Han ran into the shelter and quickly lifted Jose up. He wanted to make sure he was alive. He wanted to ask him the details of the attack. Jose opened his eyes, said he was alive, and asked him not to yell so much. They gave him all the help they could, lit a fire, and Li Han asked Jose who had attacked him. He said it was Carl and added that 7 men in his gang couldn't have done it with just the 3 of them. Jose said he fought them as best he could, but they were able to overpower him and take all their supplies. He warned him that they would still come back, so they had better just leave and find another hideout. Li Han looked at him and firmly told him that there was no way he would run away. Now he couldn't forgive these bandits for what they had done to his friends. He couldn't let them bully them. They gathered their belongings and left the shelter. Li Han helped Jose walk, and Kuro carried their belongings. Li Han said that while there was time to find a new shelter, the bandits could stay there and think they could beat them. Li Han was determined that he had to stop this gang who were robbing other privates with impunity. He told his friends that they had to ambush them. He was going to attack them just after sunset. After sunset, they returned to their past hideout. Li Han said that he thought so, and thought they would use their hideout. They saw that they had posted 2 men guarding the entrance to the hideout, and they needed a plan on how to get revenge on those bandits. Li Han looked at Kuro and said that they would start as soon as he was ready. He added that he alone could not handle them, but together they had a good chance of defeating those dastardly bandits. Kuro began to tune up for the fight. He thought that Li Han was his friend and the only one who really believed in him. He would never disappoint him, so he began to attack the bandits. He saw perfectly well those he had to disarm. He used telekinesis and the nearby stones to attack the guards before the entrance, but they could not understand what was happening. Carl and his subordinates were inside when they heard the screams coming from outside. They realized that they were trapped, and then Carl ordered them to quickly get out of the shelter and go to the street. When they ran outside, they found 2 of their companions screaming in pain and told them to go to the bushes, where the unknown men were throwing stones at them, and asked them to dodge them. Kuro attacked them again with stones. Unlike them, he saw their every move and hit the target. The bandits ran into the bushes and shouted that it was too dark and they couldn't see anything. Li Han didn't wait for Kuro to deal with them. He attacked them under the cover of night and successfully disarmed the rest of the gang members, who were much weaker than him in martial arts. He used his spear to get right in front of Carl. Carl watched as Li Han and Kuro beat up all of his men who couldn't give them an equal fight. Carl realized that now he would have to fight Li Han in battle, and it would be a one-on-one duel. He looked at him and thought it was impossible to put down 6 men alone. Then Carl realized he wasn't alone. He wondered who else was here with him. Li Han told Kuro to come out of the ambush. He could no longer hide, but now he would continue fighting alone. Carl was furious that they were being overpowered by 2 losers, including Kuro. Li Han was serious and told Carl that they had come to avenge Jose, whom they had brutally beaten. He said that this was not a training match and that he could expect no mercy from him. Carl picked up the weapon lying next to his subordinate and said that he had had enough of the chatter. He began to threaten Li Han, saying that he would just crush him in a fight. Li Han suggested that Carl try to crush him, and then Carl rushed at him with an attack. Confident in his strength, Li Han calmly watched him, and as soon as he got close to him, he successfully attacked him by punching him in the face. Carl was shocked that Li Han was able to strike him so easily. He decided that now he had to attack him. He tried to strike back, but Li Han dodged and struck him again with his spear in the chest. Carl bent over in pain. It was hard for him to breathe, and he began to sweat a lot and shake a little. Li Han stood beside him and asked him if he was in pain, and he told him to bear with it because it was just the beginning of his suffering. He raised his weapon and asked Li Han to stop bragging because he hadn't given up yet. He wasn't going to do that. He was going to fight him as hard as he could. He wanted him to feel the pain too. Li Han realized that Carl wanted to damage him and that he would attack him no matter what. Carl concentrated and rushed to attack him, but Li Han blocked all his attempts to hit him and struck back with punches that reached the target. Carl fell to the ground and thought it was impossible. He was shocked at how strong Li Han was, but he was able to beat him with his spear without much effort. Li Han was angry with him. He went up to him and told him that Jose was seriously injured. They didn't look at that and brutally beat him up. He couldn't understand why they did it. He thought it was their turn to be beaten up. Carl felt Li Han looking at him with contempt. He started to rise and told him not to look at him as if he was nothing in front of him. He didn't understand how he dared treat him like that. He remembered that he was a genius and widely known actor in Germany. My father had successfully used my popularity for political purposes for his own gain. However, this was not enough for his father, who sent him to the organization to become a saker in the hope that the whole country would soon fall to its knees. He told him that he had to become one, even if he had to go over his head. Carl stood up and said he had already gotten this far, and some pathetic freak like him couldn't stop him. Carl threw sand in his eyes to attack him. He pounced on him and successfully attacked him. He gave him a heavy blow to the face, from which Li Han fell to the ground. Carl was ready to get him out of his way to achieve his goal and please his father. Carl grabbed Li Han and began to strike him blow by blow, trying to hit him as hard as possible so that he would not be able to recover from the damage. Kuro saw this and ran to his aid. Kuro was almost there, ready to pounce on Carl, knowing he couldn't defeat him in a fight. Carl saw Kuro and shouted at him to stop and not to come near them. Carl was able to strike enough blows to make Li Han fall unconscious. He stood over him, wiped the blood from his face, raised his weapon, and looked at Kuro, who stood in a daze and did not know what to do. He held his weapon in his hands and looked absolutely insane. He said he wouldn't let anyone look down on him, but Kuro didn't wait for him to attack and attack him first. Kuro used his powers and telekinesis to hit Carl in the face with a rock. He told him to get away from Li Han. Carl couldn't believe that the weakling Kuro dared hit him in the face. Carl walked up to him and grabbed him by his jacket. He understood that now he was trying to humiliate him. He said he never liked him, that he was useless, and that he didn't understand why he still hadn't been kicked out of the organization. He saw that Kuro was afraid of him because he was trembling with fear. Carl added that such a weakling had no place in the organization. Suddenly, Carl felt that someone was standing behind him, and he realized that it was Li Han. Li Han heard all the words Carl was saying to Kuro, and they made him even more angry. He couldn't bear to have his friend humiliated in front of him, so he struck a blow, and Carl collapsed on the ground a few meters away. He looked at him and asked him if he thought he was worth anything himself. He added that Carl was only able to cling and hide behind numbers. He did not consider himself a strong opponent because he constantly humiliated and beat only those weaker than him. Li Han said Del Simon, Dimitri Jose, and Kuro were many times stronger than him and had great potential to become top psychers. He had no doubt about that. Carl began to tremble with fear when Li Han swung his spear at him. He asked him what he would do if he found out that he wasn't perfect, and that before getting any farther, he would have to get rid of a lot of things. Li Han looked at him and realized that he only felt hatred and pity for him. He understood why he was like this, but he could not forgive his actions. He decided to deal him a decisive blow with his weapon. But he didn't kill him. He stuck the spear deep into the ground near his head, saying that everyone had the right to climb to the top and that it wasn't up to him to decide who was worthy of the top. Li Han turned around and started to walk away, adding that Carl should look for another way to climb to the top. He warned him that if he touched his friends again the next time, there would be nothing left of him. Carl lay on the ground in the woods all alone. He smiled and said that he never wanted to be a psyker anyway. It was his father's dream but not his, and he laughed out loud. Kuro and Li Han returned to their hideout, where Jose awaited them. He realized that they had avenged Carl's team, who later decided to leave the organization. They practiced hard every day while they were on the island. Kuro improved his abilities every day and got better and better. Li Han was by his side and genuinely happy for him. After a week of training on a deserted island was completed and rescue planes came to pick them up, they learned a lot despite being far away from the organization and survived on the island despite the difficulties. When Kuro saw the rescue planes, he was pleased and said he would not want to go through this again. They went to the landing place to board the aircraft and return to the organization. When they saw them, the rest of the privates approached them and began to thank them for surviving only because they had shared their food with them, curious as to how Kuro had managed to fish so skillfully for them. The privates were shocked when they found out Jose had fire ability and didn't understand why he kept it from them. They surrounded him and kept saying thank you to him. Jose thought they were all very noisy, but he was pleased to hear them admiring them. Jose said that they had to be grateful to Li Han. If it wasn't for him, they wouldn't have managed to survive on this island. Li Han noticed that he was notified on his watch that the survival skills training had been completed, and they were congratulated on successfully passing the problematic test. Del Simon and Dimitri received messages from Sergeant Red, who also congratulated them on successfully passing the test. Dimitri never thought he would be glad to hear he was quite hungry. Sergeant Red told everyone on the island to come aboard only when summoned. Li Han couldn't believe they weren't all being taken at once. He didn't understand what that had to do with it. Li Han, Kuro, Del Simon, and Dimitri were the first aboard. They were met by Sergeant Red, who, as always, looked very stern. He had to tell them why they were the first on board. Sergeant Red said that all this time, the instructors had been watching their movements. By unanimous decision, only 4 candidates had been chosen, and they sat and listened attentively to him. He said they weren't just practicing survival skills. They were taking a test to select the best of the best who were ready to become defenders of humanity. Sergeant Red looked at all 4 of them and said it was time for them to move on to the second year of training. Li Han was serious and showed no emotion. He knew they had a growth drug waiting for them and didn't know how to react to the news. They returned to the organization, where the vacation began a few days later. Li Han was lying on his bed reading a book when Jose approached him and suggested he play soccer with them while they had free time. Jose took out a ball and asked Li Han if he knew how to play soccer. Li Han got out of bed and replied that he knew the rules. Li Han thought that vacations were rare in the organization, so he decided to play soccer with Jose and the other guys. They went outside, where there were already 2 teams, Jose, Li Han, and Kuro playing against Del Simon and Dimitri. There were enough players on each team to start the match. Dimitri said that abilities could not be used during the game. Vacations in the organization were arranged only on special occasions. Now, all the instructors of the first year participated in the meeting while their subordinates played soccer, leaving all worries behind. At the instructor meeting, the issue of transition to the second year was discussed. It was a very important issue, and everyone should have been present. They had to develop a clear sequence of further actions with freshmen. At the head of the table sat Alexander Rekor, the organization's chief of staff. He saw that everyone had gathered, so he did not hesitate to propose starting their meeting. The first to speak was Sasha Grace, the principal investigator of Department Number 2. She said that there were 4 candidates for the second year and wanted to know what was known about them. The head of the organization said that Del Simon and Dimitri were the ones whom he saw no reason to prevent 2 from moving on to the next course they were more than worthy of. Then, first of all, he decided to mention Li Han. He said that his level left much to be desired from the very first day of his arrival in the organization, so he doubted this candidate. He added that John Red had suggested the boy as a candidate. Had it not been for the sergeant's special treatment of him, Li Han would still be listed in the D class with nothing special to show for it. Alexander Rekor looked at them and asked them to explain why they should have transferred Li Han to the second year. He wanted the others to share their reasons, and he was willing to listen to them carefully. Wei Chen said that according to the results of the duel between Sergeant Red and Li Han, it was obvious that the candidate possessed patience and incredible fortitude in addition to excellent weapon skills. He added that all these qualities were inherent in the soldier. The chief of staff was quite surprised that it was not every day that he heard such praise from an instructor. Sergeant Red replied that he would not have allowed Li Han to go to the second course without such speeches. Sergeant Red said that despite his low psychic potential, the boy had found an unusual way to use psychokinesis. It seemed that in that fight he had used it to increase his body rotation, which enhanced his attacks. He added that the most amazing thing about him was that he had the mindset to come up with such brilliant ideas at the time Li Han beat Del Simon, headed towards the goal, and managed to score a goal. The chief of staff listened carefully to Sergeant Red. He did not answer anything. He only suggested that they discuss the next candidate for the second year. He could not decide on Li Han's future fate. Jose ran up to Li Han and, smiling, remembered that he had told him that he didn't know how to play soccer, that he only knew the rules and had never played before. Still, he noted that he was a good player. Dimitri looked at Del Simon and asked him if he was not a master of soccer because he was from Great Britain, but Del Simon could not understand how it was connected. They almost fought, but they had to continue the match. The next candidate raised a lot of questions for the head of the research department. She thought they were mocking her because Kuro was hypersensitive, and his nervous system was more profound in processing physical, social, and emotional stimuli. She added that the transition to the second year was followed by interference in the physical development of the body, which put great pressure on the psyche, and she was worried that Kuro might not be able to withstand such a transformation. The head of the research department was adamantly opposed to Kuro going to the second year, where he would have to undergo a physical transformation of his entire body. She said that by doing so, they were now literally telling her to kill the child. Sergeant Red took a deep breath and answered the chapter that Kuro was the strongest in terms of ability. He was superior to everyone else, and he could see the future a few seconds ahead, which was strategically important to them. The chief of staff said that Kuro was emotionally weak. The sergeant replied that he had to have Li Han, who could positively influence Kuro mentally. Sergeant Red added that now they were like brothers who helped each other, and he was sure they could get into the second year. The chief of staff removed his glasses and said it all came down to Li Han again. The boss looked at the instructors and couldn't understand why they both wanted Li Han to enter the second year so badly. They were literally advertising him and making him look good, but he couldn't understand why they wanted it so badly. Li Han again tried to reach the goal, but he was met by several defenders and forced to pass to Jose, who picked up the ball and continued to move towards the goal. He was confident that he could beat the defenders and score an important goal. Jose looked up and saw that he was met by Dimitri and Del Simon, who would not let him near the goal. They were determined, so Jose passed to Li Han, who was next to him. Li Han decided to shoot at the goal with one touch. The ball hit the top corner of the goal and he scored again. He and his team were incredibly happy and forgot about all their problems. Jose ran up to Li Han to congratulate him on scoring a goal and tell him that he had played great soccer. Their joy didn't last long. One of the instructors came onto the field and told them that the games were over. Sergeant Red said the meeting was over, and the results would be announced publicly a little later. However, since they were here anyway, he could tell them everything now. He informed them that all 4 candidates were moving on to the second year. Li Han didn't know how to react to this news. He was in a stupor. Then Jose came up to him and asked him with a smile why he wasn't happy that he had been promoted to the second year. He was really happy for him and congratulated him on this achievement. Jose asked him to take his place. He was sure he would be able to join him soon in his sophomore year. Li Han held out his hand and said he would definitely take his place. He was sure they would meet again. Sergeant Red interrupted their goodbye and ordered all the candidates to go to their rooms so the prospective sophomores could start packing and await further instructions. Li Han looked at him and thanked him for the opportunity to move up to a sophomore year and for his fight for the right to be class president. It seemed that the sergeant had played a massive role in everything that had happened. Sergeant Red replied that he wasn't sure he should be thanked for that. He said he had no turning back now. He added that they would see each other again if he managed to get to the third year. He took out his cigar and was about to leave when he suddenly told him to survive his second year despite all the hardships that awaited him. He needed to survive to get into his third year. In the evening, the 4 incoming sophomores met outside to reach their destination. Dimitri smiled and said it was time for them to hit the road. Del Simon looked at him and thought he had talked too much. Li Han looked at him and said they had to go to the second medical ward, where Kuro was already waiting. He was afraid of the unknown. He noticed that Kuro was very worried and shaking with fear. Then Li Han put his hand on his shoulder and said everything would be fine. He would be by his side and not let him die. Kuro realized that they were in for the most dangerous and unpleasant procedure. He replied that he was very scared when he thought about it. He was afraid that something would be done to them and they would become adults. Dimitri said that they had nothing to fear and joyfully went to the Del Simon ward. When asked what he was so excited about, Dimitri replied that they would soon be much stronger, and that pleased him. They arrived at the ward where Dr. Sasha Grace was waiting for them. She informed them that they would be under her care for the next 5 weeks. Li Han couldn't believe they would have to be in the ward for so long, and he didn't realize that the procedure had taken so long. She replied that the body needed this time to transform the first 2 weeks they would spend in the incubator, and the remaining 3 were allocated for rehabilitation. They hadn't realized they would need to be in the incubator for 14 days. Del Simon and Dimitri were sure they could handle it, but Kuro was worried sick. Li Han saw that his comrades were in slight tension, and he wished they didn't doubt their strength and were confident in themselves. He raised his hand to inform them that they would see each other in 2 weeks, and he managed to calm them down before the arduous procedure. They folded their arms as if they were already a team and ready to move forward no matter what. Li Han helped them deal with the tension. Sasha Grace watched them and found the sight quite entertaining. She thought it was the boy the sergeant had praised at the meeting and realized it was Li Han. Dmitri suggested that Del Simon join them, but he replied that it was too childish. However, this didn't affect the mood of the others. 7 days later, Dr. Sasha Grace began the procedure. She informed them that the process of administering the culture fluid was beginning. Del Simon stood calmly while his incubator filled with liquid, but Kuro could hardly contain his emotions. He was visibly nervous, but wanted to continue the procedure. Dmitri thought the liquid was quite disgusting, and the unpleasant texture made him want to stay away, but it was too late. Li-Han felt that he was short of breath and was beginning to choke. He tried to get his breathing in order, or the procedure would end. The doctor informed him that claustrophobia was a natural reaction of a child's body at this stage. He apologized for it and asked him to be patient a little longer. They should be asleep soon. She said the sleep induction procedure had begun. She thought there were no abnormalities after a week, but what was planned for today could have destabilized them. The doctor couldn't understand why people had to go so far just to survive, and that question kept bothering her. The doctor's assistant noticed that she looked tired from the experience, and she suggested she rest to build up. Sasha Grace left the lab and went to her office, where the sergeant waited for her. When she saw him, she remembered him telling her he didn't care about the children undergoing the procedure. She couldn't understand why the sergeant kept coming to her ward daily, even after informing her that he didn't care about them. Sergeant Red smiled and replied to her that he wanted to make sure the doctor wasn't bullying, maiming, and destroying his attachments. She told him that their condition was stable, and they had already started the second dose. She didn't like that Sergeant Red saw them as an investment, but she held back her emotions. She explained that the second dose contained the dragon's psychocore fluid, which was highly concentrated with heart particles. Sergeant Red said that forced interaction with the core would allow them to use psychic abilities more stable in the future. He thought it was possible that Li-Han could do something important, but suddenly, a sharp signal from the doctor's watch interrupted his thoughts. She got up and quickly ran back to the lab. She hurried to find out what had happened in her absence. The staff called her back because Li-Han had noticed strange changes in his brain activity, and they didn't know how to proceed. They informed her that he had regained consciousness and he would have to endure incredible pain that he might not be able to bear. The doctor couldn't let that happen, and she was sure they should have immediately stopped the procedure and pulled him back out. She immediately ran to his incubator to turn the lever and stop the procedure, but Sergeant Red suddenly stopped her hand. The doctor looked at him and couldn't understand why he wouldn't let her stop the procedure, even though Li-Han would have to endure incredible suffering. Sergeant Red said he couldn't interrupt the process. He had to finish the transformation at all costs. The doctor listened to the sergeant and did not interrupt the process. After a specified period of time, Li-Han was sitting in front of her. She asked him how he felt after the transformation, to which Li-Han replied that he was fine. The doctor said his case was the first in her experience she'd never seen a Saker with resistance to psychic abilities. She remembered how he had suffered during the procedure, and how she wanted to interrupt the incubation process immediately. It was unbearably painful for the doctor to watch him suffer. She knew that psychic abilities were the last thing Li-Han had relied on to get to this stage. Sergeant Red, holding the doctor back, said he didn't need the psycho-resonance and asked him to continue it without it. He was sure Li-Han wouldn't just give up. She informed him that he had only developed physically, and this was the first time in their history. She wondered if he felt any discomfort or pain anywhere. Li-Han replied that he felt rested. At least now he didn't have to worry about his psychic ability, and he would have been kicked out of the academy because of his low grades. The doctor was impressed by his attitude. She realized that it was not for nothing that Sergeant Red had marked him as the most emotionally stable of all the candidates. She knew that psycho abilities were directly related to the psyche. Still, she couldn't understand why, with such a robust base, he didn't excel with any of the abilities. She decided she needed to better investigate his resilience. Li-Han left the doctor's office, and the first person he met was Dmitri, who came over to congratulate him now they were sophomores. He was glad to see him. Li-Han noticed that the others had also come with Dmitri. He told them that 5 weeks had flown by. Li-Han added that they had all changed incredibly, especially Kuro, who looked amazing. No one expected him to be so transformed. He said he was glad to see them all alive and that the transformation process had gone very well for all of them. Del Simon turned around and started to walk away. He said he didn't know what to be happy about. He was sure it couldn't be otherwise. He asked Li-Han not to get cocky and act like a leader. Dmitri asked Li-Han not to take Del Simon's words seriously. He was sure that he was going through a rough patch, and that was why his behavior was quite bad. When they went to the sophomore housing, they knew that, at first glance, the sophomore training was no different from their previous training. But in fact, the difference was that this was where the soldiers formed into squads. Li Han knew that each squad had 4 to 10 people and that there were only 12 sophomore squads right now. He thought that now he had his own room, and it was hard to get used to the usual noise and cramped quarters, but the silence made him uncomfortable. Li Han knew that he and Kuro had gotten into Squad 7, where they were met by Kato Soki, the squad leader and his assistant, for a personal introduction to the newcomers. The squad leader said that in the second year, the training was divided into several types, but 3 were the main ones: fire, airborne training, and street fighting. Kato Soki asked if they knew why they needed to be able to shoot firearms, or if they needed it explained to them, to which Li Han replied that they had been told that modern weapons were quite effective against minions. The squad leader confirmed his words, adding that they knew the minions were low-intelligence creatures, ogre foot soldiers, and werewolves. He added that among the enemy troops were also creatures with a high level of intelligence. They were called LO mid-level commanders, and like them, humans possessed psycho abilities. They realized that psycho weapons didn't work against them. The squad leader added that such attacks wouldn't do them any harm. However, unlike dragons, their psycho energy was finite, and when the energy ran out, Elo could be easily destroyed. The squad leader smiled and said that all 3 types of basic training were equally important. He was sure that all the skills they had learned would be helpful in fights against other squads. He explained that training battles were always held in artificial forests where the arena was small and the environment resembled real combat conditions. The leader explained that the point was to capture the enemy's flag at their base. They were required to strategize based on the individual skills of each squad member, and this type of training was extremely dangerous. He explained to them that although the weapon had been stripped of its sharp blade, it could still inflict severe injury. The leader said that the airborne drills were safer because the participants were hovering on platforms, and all they had to do to win was to throw their opponent off them. He added that, however, here, they would need an assistant who could control the platforms and move them from one place to another. Sometimes, these platforms were used as weapons. The leader said that until now they had not had any psychers capable of such support, but they were happy to have Kuro. He added that their entire squad was hoping for him and his psycho abilities to bring them the results they needed. Still, Kuro was getting very agitated and didn't know what to say to him. The assistant leader ordered Kuro to stop mumbling. He said no one was interested in his opinion. He just had to do what was beneficial to the squad. Li Han was confident that Kuro would have done well. He added that he would have done better if no one had pressured him. The assistant leader quickly approached Li Han and shouted at him to shut up. He was sure that he knew nothing at all, so it would be better for him to be quiet. The leader stopped his assistant. He smiled and said that they had just arrived, and they still had much to learn from them. He said that they were now also sophomores. However, everyone here was older and much more experienced than them. He asked Li Han to realize this and show more respect. The leader smirked and said that, to be honest, he only wanted Kuro in his squad, and Li Han was a mere free appendage to him. He began to mock Li Han, saying that he had nothing to expect from the loser with the worst psychic ability, and asking him to stay out of their way. Li Han was uncomfortable hearing the entire squad's taunts and could hardly restrain himself from fighting them, but he remembered that as long as he was here, his family was secure. He smiled and replied that he had heard him. Li Han added that he wouldn't dare get in his way since he was the squad leader. Squad leader Kato replied that it was great. He was glad that he and he were able to agree. Immediately, they approached each other and silently shook hands. Kato, looking at him, thought he was incredibly arrogant. He wanted to see how long Li Han would last. Li Han looked at him confidently. In response, he thought that he was willing to show them what he was capable of. He would love to show them his skills. He went to the shower after the first training session. He needed to freshen up and organize his thoughts. He began to analyze his actions and look for mistakes in them. Li Han remembered their first combat firing ranges, where he had decently shown what he could do with a weapon. He tried his best. He was sure the squad leader could appreciate his skills. He had heard that Kato was pleased, and he had nothing to pick on. The shooting instructor was pleased with Li Han's results, so he turned around and saw that Kuro couldn't handle the task before him. Kuro didn't know how to handle the weapon properly. It scared him, and he didn't want to use it. He was completely confused. Squad leader Kato was grabbing his head. He didn't have the words to describe his frustration at Kuro. He didn't know he was utterly hopeless at shooting. Li Han, showering, knew that Kuro was doing everything possible and what was in his power. He was waiting for the moment to be appreciated. Kato smiled and informed Li Han that he was staying in reserve and didn't know where he could use it despite the fact that he had trained better than the others. He added that the more people in the squad, the harder it was to assign the right roles. There were too many of them, and there were even more melee soldiers like him. Kato told him not to worry. All the sophomores were given access to the training center, and there he would at least be able to watch them. Li Han realized that the only reason he was putting up with all of this was his family, which gave him the strength not to give up. He was sure everything would be fine. He went to the training center where he could observe his squad, and they were told that the 3rd and 9th squads had participated in today's flag capture. Kato informed his squad that there was a newcomer in the 3rd squad and asked them to closely monitor him and analyze his actions. Li Han immediately realized that Kato meant Del Simon, who was known to everyone and knew what he was capable of in battle. The psychers watching him knew that Del Simon was the psychogenic one. Still, they noticed that he was just a regular arrogant guy. When the 9th squad saw the 3rd, they thought they had gone crazy. They realized it was unwise to go on the offensive altogether. The leader of the 9th squad replied that they had with them an invincible psyker, who was believed to be a true psychogenic. He was sure that with Della Amon's abilities, they would easily defeat the 3rd squad and take the flag from them. The 3rd squad leader asked him to shut up and not talk nonsense, and he said they needed to neutralize him before he could use his abilities. Suddenly, they noticed that all their weapons had disappeared without a trace. No one could understand how it happened or who was behind this mysterious disappearance. They looked up and noticed that all their weapons were above them. They realized with horror that behind it was Del Simon, who had single-handedly massacred them. Del Simon didn't hesitate to wrap their own weapons against them, watching their anxiety and fear grow. The leader of the 9th squad shouted that the way was open and ordered his psychers to move forward, and they rushed forward to take out the 3rd squad. He took the flag of the 3rd squad and told everyone watching that they had nothing else to look at and had managed to defeat the Blues and win easily. Kato said after watching that the man with powerful psychic abilities was an integral part of the team. He added that his strategy was similar to that of the Reds, and he was sure that with Kuro, they could realize it. Kuro began to worry. He was afraid that all the responsibility was on him. Li Han approached the Kato leader and informed him he had another proposal to bring them victory. Li Han said that the 9th squad didn't take advantage of the terrain, didn't even have a specific strategy, and decided to forge ahead, relying on the individual abilities of the team members. He wanted to tell them his strategy that could help them in the battle for the flag, but suddenly, he was interrupted by the squad leader. Kato asked him to continue his sentence. He was sure that Li Han meant to say that if he were the leader of the squad, he would be able to lead them to victory. Li Han fell silent and looked at the squad leader carefully, and he could see why Kato hated him. Suddenly, the assistant leader called him out and calmly asked him to follow him without giving him any reason or time to think. Li Han followed him, and the aide informed him that he was a very capable psyker. He and Kato recognized that, but this was another matter entirely. The aide informed him that he had no place in their squad, and that this was the opinion of absolutely all squad members. Li Han realized that Kato was watching him. He looked at his aide and asked him why he thought that. He was sure that everyone was sure that he had no place among them. The aide replied that his opinion differed from Kato's, and Li Han was not afraid to express it. The aide realized that sometimes Li Han should have been listened to, but it was impossible. He explained that the 7th squad could only have one leader, and if they began to have even the slightest doubt about Kato's actions, the team would fall apart. The aide added that while Kato was leading them, he would not be able to participate in training battles. He asked him to pick a suitable time and request a transfer to another squad. Li Han was upset now that he understood why Kato was so negative towards him. He realized that Kato was afraid that he would manage to become the leader of his squad after he led them to victory. He realized that the leader's decisions were not to be challenged by anyone. He compromised his authority and considered transferring to another unit. Li Han came to the sergeant to file a report. Reading the report, the sergeant couldn't believe that Li Han had decided to take such a step. The sergeant asked if he was serious about taking this step, to which Li Han replied with complete confidence that he had no other choice. He added that he needed to discuss the matter with all the second-year instructors and would have to wait for their decision. Li Han went back to his room and thought it was to his advantage to think things over and not be in a hurry. He thought that if he didn't get to participate in the training battles, he needed to focus on improving his skills. He decided to analyze the squad's fights and develop his own strategy. Li Han realized that passing the time was a great activity while waiting for the instructor's decision. Suddenly, Kuro came to his room and called him to talk to him. Kuro wanted to know what he had talked to the deputy leader about. Li Han replied that it was unimportant and asked if Kuro was ready for tomorrow's airborne training. He said he could only operate 4 platforms with squad members at a time. Li Han was delighted. He said his abilities had developed at an incredible speed and that he was now one of the strongest sophomores. He asked Kuro to keep his nose up. He would come cheer for him at the practice bout. He was sure Kuro would do well and be up to the task. The psychers gathered again at the training center to watch the fight between the squads. They had heard that the 7th squad also had a genius named Kuro. They wanted to see what he was capable of. Li Han also came to watch the fight, but he had a completely different goal in mind. He needed to gather data to develop his strategy. Li Han noticed that the duel had begun, and the leader of the 7th squad turned to Kuro and said that they were counting on him and his abilities. Kuro didn't reply to the leader. He tried to tune into the fight, realizing that his abilities would determine whether they could win or not. Li Han watched the fight between the 1st and 7th squads. It was an aerial battle to learn how to use airboards. He knew that dragons mainly fought in the air. They all knew how to fly. The leading equipment, along with the jetpack and hook cable, is the airboard. Some of them had firearms. Li Han realized that one person could operate 2 airboards in aerial combat, meaning he used one board for support and movement and the other to damage the enemy. He knew there was a position on the team, the most crucial fighter at this training session. He worked only with the other team members' airboards and controlled as many of them as his strength allowed. The support helped the team by being in the rear and controlling the equipment with telekinesis, allowing the fighters to focus on the battle. Li Han thought it was perfect for Kuro, as he could control 4 airbags simultaneously. The leader of the 7th squad informed his fighters that they were ready to go into battle. He was sure that if they stuck to the plan, they would be able to win. He did not hesitate to order the vanguard to advance. Their task was to attack the enemies quickly and decisively, leaving them no chance. The leader of the 1st squad ordered the other squads to attack the enemy, but he told them to be extremely careful not to fall off the airboard. Kaido's aides attacking the opponent thought they would be careful in advance, just as the leader of Kaido's squad had told them. He remembered that Kaido had been sure the opponents would split off in different directions immediately, leaving open flanks to strike. They were ready for it, and Kaido decided to attack them the moment they split up. They managed to throw a few fighters off the airboard, and Kaido thought everything was going according to plan. The psychers watching the duel were shocked that they had just started, and 2 were already eliminated. They couldn't believe that the 7th squad was so strong. They noticed that they seemed to know where the opponent was going. Li Han knew that Kuro had the lead role. Kaido explained to his squad that the 1st squad didn't have strong support. Each fighter would control his own airboard. He knew Kuro could take 4 boards under control, so he needed to take his airboard and his assistant. He asked him to use his ability to see the future to learn about the enemy's movements. Kaido was sure that with Kuro, they could easily defeat the 1st squad. The assistant leader said that they were both good at close combat. He suggested that the leader focus on him, and the leader supported his idea. Li Han listened carefully to the plan of the leader and the aide and thought that their plan had a good chance of success, at least in theory. Kuro tried his best in the fight. He thought that he couldn't make a single mistake, and if he failed, the whole team would lose, and he would be the only one to blame. He used all his abilities to help the team. Once again, he managed to look into the future, and he saw that his team was winning. The leader of the 1st squad was shocked by their fighting abilities. He wanted to know if they had always been so strong, and he realized that only 2 men left in his squad. He saw that the 7th squad still hadn't lost a single fighter and was practically trapped, but he wouldn't give up, hoping they would be fortunate. The 1st squad leader realized that the 7th squad's main strength lay in its supporters, who stood behind the team's backs, controlling their airboards. He decided that they needed to take him out of action, and then they would be able to prevail. He quickly ordered his aide to execute Plan A, which he had planned in advance. knowing that this move could be pivotal to the battle's outcome. Kato ordered his fighters to go on the offensive. He realized that there were only 2 of them left, and there would be nothing they could do to them. He was shocked that they decided to openly start attacking the 2 of them. The first squad had a clear plan that they followed without deviation. Their leader deftly jumped over the opponents, preparing to strike a surprise blow while his aide held back the melee fighters. Kato and his assistant found themselves restrained by the enemy, who held them tightly. He was shocked that they had managed to catch them. They could barely stand on their airboards due to the enemy hanging on them. The leader of the first squad managed to discount one of the enemies and then proceeded to attack the Kuro support, which was their main target. One of the fighters of the 7th squad noticed that the enemy was heading towards Kuro. He was about to pursue him to protect Kuro, but suddenly he heard the voice of his leader. Kato noticed that his fighter was about to pursue the enemy. He stopped him and ordered him to help them. He added that the enemy had almost managed to throw them off. Li-Han was shocked by Kato's actions. He realized that the fighter was supposed to be protecting the supporter. It would be a huge problem for them if Kuro managed to cut off the rest of the team. He remembered Kato telling Kuro to always remember that the 4th and 8th airports were to be by his side for his protection. Kuro noticed that the enemy was rapidly attacking him and realized that, at this point, he would need no help. He would have to rely solely on his own strength. He decided to use the airboards for defense, knowing that the 4th and 8th were free and could provide him with the protection he needed. Kuro decided to use them quietly and inconspicuously so that his opponent wouldn't suspect anything. He wanted to catch him off guard and throw him off the airboard immediately. Kato and his squad managed to neutralize the most powerful opponent who was holding their opponent. The opponent could not fight them, and he fell off the airboard. Suddenly, Kato shouted loudly, warning that they were being attacked from the rear. This caught everyone off guard and demanded immediate action. He noticed how the enemy disarmed Kuro, who was left unprotected. This moment made him realize how vulnerable they were in battle. Kato and his team suddenly plummeted downward when their airboards lost control under the control of Kuro, who was incapacitated. The psychers watching the fight couldn't understand what was going on. They noticed that it was now a one-on-one battle. They knew Kuro was flying 2 airboats, but he was tired, so the team lost. Li-Han thought he knew this would be the end of it. Kato relied entirely on Kuro's telekinesis, and his entire plan was centered around it. He noticed that when Kuro was attacked, he once again used telekinesis to defend himself, but he didn't have enough strength to aim the artboards at the enemy, and they fell right behind his back. The leader of the first squad smiled as he realized that Kuro had completely lost the power to use telekinesis and wouldn't be able to resist his attacks. Li-Han realized that Kuro appeared to be under tremendous pressure. He made a fatal mistake that cost his team the victory. He thought that if Kato had taken him into Kuro's team, Kuro would not be alone now. Li-Han dreamed of taking the place of the squad leader. 3 weeks passed, and Li-Han returned to the sergeant, who informed him that he had a conversation regarding his request. The sergeant reported that his request had been reviewed, and his application for a new squad leader approved, a decision that opened up new opportunities for him. Li-Han was stunned by this decision. He couldn't believe that their agreement to appoint him head of the squad had become a reality that would change his life forever. The sergeant said that in his first year, he had proven himself to be a true commander, and the instructors unanimously decided to give him a chance as a test of his reputation and charisma. He gave Li-Han the conditions for creating a new squad. The squad had to consist of at least 4 people, including the head of the other squads. 1 person from each squad was allowed, but the selected person had the right to refuse him. Li-Han realized that if he followed these points, he would become an enemy to all the squads. As soon as he started to act, he needed to prepare well to not miss out on the most talented guys. He said that if the sergeant said he would succeed, it meant that he was sure to make a decent squad and prove to everyone that he was a real leader. The sergeant replied that he was quick to grasp information, and now, as the leader of the new squad, he expected positive results from him. As he left the office, Li-Han began to think about his team. Li-Han thought that the first people who came to his mind were Jose and Kuro, who were already in other squads. He felt their support even from a distance and was sure that they would agree to join his squad. He thought it would be great if they were with him, but Jose wasn't here, so he decided to talk to Kuro about it first. Li-Han suddenly remembered that there was another person he wanted to see in his squad, who was very strong and could be of use to them in further trials. He decided not to postpone the conversation and headed to his room, determined to discuss an essential matter concerning his squad. Li Han came to Dmitri to try to lure him to his squad. Dmitri opened the door. Dmitri was surprised to see Li Han. He smiled and asked him what brought him to him. Kato was furious. He said that because of Kuro, they were constantly losing, to which his assistant replied that he had warned him about the need to bring Della Simon into the team. He agreed with him, noting that Del Simon had shown himself in all his glory. He had single-handedly defeated several opponents, and his hand-to-hand combat and telekinesis skills were impeccable. Li Han heard Kato say that Kuro was utterly useless under the same conditions, and that his abilities were useless. Kato added that if they hadn't found a replacement for him, they would have had to keep him as a backup all the time, and he was sure it would have weakened the team in battles. Dmitri couldn't believe that Li Han had decided to assemble his own squad. He wondered who else he planned to invite to his future team. Li Han replied that he wanted to call Kuro as well. He had wanted to work with them from the beginning. Dmitri replied that he felt that no commander would agree to give him his fighter. He told Dmitri that he hadn't answered his offer and that he needed to hear his decision before moving on. After a little thought, Dmitri said that he was grateful for his invitation, but his leaving would be a betrayal he couldn't allow. He added that he was the head of the 5th squad, and therefore, he could not leave his guys and go to his squad. Li Han was visibly upset by Dmitri's refusal. Although he understood his decision, he still felt disappointed inside because he had hoped for a different outcome. Dmitri added that since they were talking, it would be better for them to remain rivals and not play boss and subordinate. He asked him not to cry when they met on the battlefield. Dmitri told him to get ready. This time he would break both his arms. Li Han walked down the corridor, noticing how the other fighters recognized him. They knew that he had decided to lead his own squad and believed that he sought power. Li Han wanted them to talk about it openly instead of whispering behind his back. He figured the news that he was putting together a squad had spread quickly among the sophomores, and it was no surprise that the heads were following him. Li Han knew that he was being watched especially closely by Kato, whom he had come to see himself. Kato had told him that he didn't expect him to betray him. Kato told him to go create his squad. They were sure he wouldn't win any battles and asked him to leave. He added that they wouldn't give him Kuro. Li Han confidently answered that Kuro would not have been able to truly reveal his talent under his command, making it clear that Kuro needed a different approach. Kato told him not to think he was the smartest. He added that in time, Kuro would become one of the best fighters in his squad. Li Han ironically thought that Kato was going to ask his opponent to wait until the massive battle began. He knew that with him, Kuro would develop much faster. He added that the squad leader's task was winning despite limited forces. Li Han believed nothing would change if he blamed someone else for the defeat. Li Han noticed that his words had hurt Kato, who ran up to him, grabbed him, and told him to shut up. Once again that Kuro would stay with them. He wasn't afraid of Kato, and answered, looking straight into his eyes, that it wasn't up to him to decide. He was sure Kuro had to make the choice himself. Kato turned to Kuro and coldly said that if he decided to leave his squad, he would still find a way to deal with him. Li Han said that Kato only knew how to talk and added that he would still talk even if Kato was drowning. Kato couldn't contain his emotions and struck at Li Han, who didn't have time to dodge and collapsed to the floor. His attack did little or no damage to Li Han. Li Han looked at Kato and said that he didn't even want to smear his hands on him, so he decided not to counterattack him. He got up and headed for the exit, but as he passed Kuro, he quietly told him he would wait for him to join his team. Kuro didn't know what to do. He was very confused and thought about what he should do. He realized that if he didn't get his team together, he could pay dearly for it. He heard the fighters say he was crazy. They couldn't understand who would leave the team for another team that didn't exist. Li Han thought that he had talked to everyone he wanted to talk to. He didn't know what he should do next, but he knew that if things went on like this, he could leave the organization. He was immersed in his thoughts and did not notice the man he bumped into in the cramped hallway. He apologized to him and said he was thinking, but the stranger said nothing and continued on his way. Li Han noticed that the stranger was moving at an incredible speed. Looking at his clothes, he couldn't understand how it was possible for him to dress like that here. Suddenly, a notification arrived on his watch. He learned that the heads of all squads had been ordered to assemble in front of treatment building number 2. A doctor met them in front of the treatment building and informed them that the 6 newcomers had to be distributed among the squads. This time, a new head would be the first to be chosen. She asked Li Han to step forward. Li Han thought this was his chance to get at least one newcomer. Li Han stepped forward and introduced himself to the newcomers. He said he was the head of the 13th squad and short of men. He would welcome any of them who decided to join him. Kato and the other squad leaders started laughing with Li Han, and they said that there was no one on his team but himself. Suddenly, one of the newcomers raised his hand and said he would like to join the 13th squad to head Li Han. Li Han was insanely happy that a new man was in his squad, and he was not alone. He knew the newcomer well and had not expected to see him here. He realized that Jose, with whom they had taken the survival test together, was in front of him. Still, he was completely different from when he was a sophomore. In the evening, in Li Han's room, Jose said it would be great if another person joined their squad. Li Han noted that some of the newcomers were still undecided and that they still had a chance to get a newcomer. Li Han thanked him for trusting him and joining him. He said he always wanted to be on the same team with him. Jose smiled and replied that those who refused to go to him were fools. They just didn't know what he was capable of, or they would have been waiting in line to join his squad. He got up and said that they would start working hard from tomorrow, and now it was time for him to go to his room to rest. Suddenly, they heard a knock on the door of Li Han's room. They couldn't understand who could have come to see him so late, and it caused them anxiety. Li Han opened the door and saw that Kuro had come to him. He didn't expect to see him so late, but he was glad that he had finally decided and made his choice. He noticed that Kuro was severely beaten. He asked what happened to him, but Kuro only smiled and didn't know how to explain it. Kuro said that Kato warned him of the consequences if he decided to leave his squad. He couldn't just let him go, and for his decision to leave, they beat him up. Li Han was amazed and asked if he was the Kuro he knew, to which Kuro replied with a smile that he wasn't sure. Jose was glad that the desert island team was together again, and was sure they could cope with everything. They heard a voice that said they were having fun and asked if they could join them, which caused everyone present to wonder. He knew that everyone was calling him a traitor, so he asked Li Han if he knew about it. He thought that the 13th squad was the most interesting. Jose approached Li Han and asked if they knew each other. He knew he was in Class B his freshman year, to which Li Han replied that he knew he and their squad needed that kind of talent. Li Han knew that his name was Knut Meyer, and he was an unusual fighter who would be useful to them in future battles, so he gladly accepted him into his team. Knut Meyer greeted everyone gathered and asked if he could join their squad. His confidence immediately caught the attention of everyone in the room. Li Han had warned him that they were in conflict with other units, and if something went wrong, they could simply disband. He asked if everyone knew what would happen if they knew the consequences and if they were willing to take the risk. He thought that now he had a great responsibility on his shoulders for his team. He must not let them down, and he was willing to do anything to help them discover their talents. Li Han was sure that they would cope with all the difficulties. He looked at his 13th squad and told them that they would see each other tomorrow. The next day, the entire 13th squad headed to the instructor's office to receive important instructions and prepare for the upcoming training. They were cheerfully greeted by the senior instructor of the second year, Grossman. He knew that Li Han was the head of the squad, and Jose and Knut Meyer were his privates. Instructor Grossman noticed Kuro was shocked by his beaten face, and he asked what happened to him. He couldn't understand why he was beaten. Kuro smiled and calmly replied that he had fallen down the stairs. His confidence calmed the instructor a bit, who asked him to be careful. However, he still had suspicions about the veracity of his words. Grossman told them that they had been given extra time because the unit had been formed later than the others. So, starting today, they will begin a preparation period. He said they had 3 weeks to prepare. He added that after that, they would be able to compete on an equal footing with the others, so they should have prepared well. He said that the competitions and opponents would be chosen randomly. Li Han thought Grossman had greatly underestimated his squad. He was ready to prove to him that he was greatly mistaken when he thought they were too weak for the others. He knew that the first competition would be the survival path. Their opponent would be the 9th squad, which consisted of strong shooters and had the highest number of victories in the survival path. Knut Meyer said he didn't like the helmet at all. He thought that style wasn't for him. He asked if he hadn't hit the target and could have just gone to the bench. Li Han, realizing that he could have been killed, approached him and forcefully put the protective helmet on him without paying attention to Knut's words. He looked Knut carefully in the eyes, and with complete seriousness, told him not to even think of giving up under any circumstances. He was not allowed to do so. Li Han, putting on his helmet, informed his team that they would be working on a plan for a mobile bunker. He added that he had come up with the name a second ago and asked them not to laugh. He realized the responsibility for them and couldn't let them die on the battlefield. His team was shocked by his plan and didn't know what they would have to do. They realized that they didn't have enough time to discuss all the details of the plan at that moment. The journey of survival was on, and the teams were to converge in battle. The 9th Squad was confident that they would be able to end this fight quickly, and without casualties, they were sure that the 13th Squad was not of their level. Li Han tried to support his fighters. He was sure that victory would be theirs despite all the difficulties that awaited them in this battle. Not a small number of fighters gathered in the training center, who could not miss the battle between the two squads. They all wanted the 9th Squad to win by destroying the traitors. Watching other fighters' behavior, Dimitri realized that such fits could gain incredible popularity among fighters. Del Simon thought there would be no winners in this fight, and he was looking forward to what Li Han would do. The 9th Squad went to attack Li Han's squad, but they didn't see anyone or meet anyone on their way. They thought his squad had stayed at the initial position. They moved cautiously toward their position. They didn't realize they had been ambushed. Canute hadn't expected the 9th Squad to be so fast. When he saw them coming closer and closer, he took out his watch and informed his squad that he had seen the enemy, who was 200 meters away from them. Li Han didn't think they would be near their position so quickly, which caught him off guard and made him reconsider his action plan. Jose was amazed at their speed. He thought they didn't even give them a break, but he realized that the 9th Squad was incredibly strong. He thought they were lucky they had time to prepare for their arrival, but didn't have time to regroup. Li Han thought that if he were in Canute's place, he would already understand the situation and make the necessary decisions without delay. Suddenly, they heard the sounds of gunfire coming from Canute's position. He was trying his best to escape from the pursuing 9th Squad, but he was wounded in the leg. It was tough for him to move. He turned around and noticed that they had almost caught up with him. He realized that with a wounded leg, he would not be able to escape from them. He thought that he could destroy at least one of them in this case. The 9th Squad was pleased to have caught up with one of their opponents, but they couldn't decide which would launch a decisive attack on the wounded man. Canute stumbled and fell to the ground. He realized that he could not stay where he was and urgently needed to seek shelter. He hid behind a tree and thought that if everything went according to plan, he would be able to join the squad. He decided the leg injury was just a minor hindrance and needed to buy time. The 9th Squad could not understand why the enemy was alone. They thought that if there were only 4 of them, there was no point in sending a scout. They were sure that this fight would have ended in a firefight anyway. One of the fighters of the 9th Squad asked to cover him. He was going to get close to the wounded enemy and finish him off before help arrived. Li Han informed his squad that it was time to start, and they were moving into their positions. He thought Canute had helped them buy enough time. He added that perhaps Canute was wounded. He assumed that the 9th Squad decided not to unite and not to act. They decided to just wait. Jose said that thanks to him, they had time to gain strength, and the group was stronger than ever. Before their battle, Kudo added that they had managed to fall the tree using fire and telekinesis. They were determined to show everyone what the 13th Squad was capable of, determined to prove their strength and skills in the upcoming challenge. They suddenly attacked the 9th Squad, but no one expected them to cut down a tree and use it as cover moving forward. Dimitri and Del Simon immediately realized that the tree was moving thanks to Kuro's telekinesis, his abilities reappearing at the most unexpected moment. Canute desperately attacked his opponents. He didn't look and pointed his weapon in their direction, hoping that at least one attack would hit someone. Suddenly, he realized that he was out of ammo and needed to reload his weapon, but that wasn't his only problem. Suddenly, a fighter from the enemy squad appeared in front of him. The enemy didn't expect to find himself alone against them. The fighters thought they were trapping them, and that they were just improvising on the fly. Dimitri said that one of the 13th Squad had already dropped out, but despite that, he had held out for a long time. Now they only had a shield of wood, and he didn't know if they could win. Del Simon noticed a weakness in their tactics, but he was sure that Li Han was well aware of it and had thought of something to cover it up. The 9th Squad was shocked to see a vast tree moving towards them, getting closer and closer, which they could not stop in any way. The 9th Squad leader thought they were all good at shooting. Still, no people among them possessed telekinesis of such strength that they could answer them. He realized he could use it against them if Li Han learned this. The squad leader ordered the fighters to stall for time. He was sure that they would soon tire and stop attacking them. Li Han thought that the opponent was right, and he knew of his squad's weaknesses. However, the wooden shield would help them gain time once more. They realized they needed to buy as much time as possible for Jose to use his firepower. The ninth squad was shocked when they saw the flames. Soon, they felt the acrid smoke, which they could not breathe. They realized that Jose had controlled the fire and that it would now be difficult for them to deal with it. Jose told Li Han that the smoke was enough. He didn't think the enemy could see anything through the smoke, and now it was up to them to deal with those who managed to escape from their trap. They waited until the fighters of the ninth squad started to emerge from the smoke, and then they started attacking the already weakened opponents without any resistance. The leader of the ninth squad noticed that 2 of his men had already dropped out, but they needn't have worried. He was sure that the enemy couldn't see anything in the thick smoke. Suddenly, due to the thick smoke, they were attacked but could not determine where it was coming from, confusing them and creating chaos. Li Han could hit his opponent with a precise shot using Kuro's telekinesis, which allowed him to see his targets clearly, even in the smoke. They defeated the ninth squad, and all the spectators were shocked by their tactics. They noticed that Kuro used rocks as radar to navigate space, and Li Han could ideally use weapons. Dmitri was glad that his friends had managed to win the hard-fought battle. Del Simon thought that Li Han and Kuro were incredibly strong when they worked together. Li Han was happy that they had managed to win and that his squad had done well, even though almost no one believed in them. Instructor Grossman had also watched the confrontation between the 2 squads he had followed closely. He had long remembered Li Han, who had impressed him with his tactics and determination. The 13th squad decided to celebrate the victory with a special dinner for the victors. They thought it was worth it, even though one of them was wounded in the battle. Jose said they would like to hear a few words from Li Han, the head of the squad who led them to victory. Li Han thanked his team for accurately following his orders. He knew his tactics were quite aggressive, but that didn't stop them. He added that he also knew they could only win because they acted together and tried to have each other's backs in battle. Kuro smiled and said that his plan was not aggressive but incredibly cool, and thanks to it, they won. Li Han said that they were lucky and that if the enemy had incredible physical strength, then their tactics were obvious to him. It was clear to him who in the ninth squad would take what position. Canute replied that that was what impressed them about him. They were delighted with the way Li Han read the opponents, and he was happy he had made the right team choice. He was so happy that he forgot about his injury, but suddenly his legs started to hurt, and Kuro suggested that he lie down and rest from the fight. Canute replied that he was fine and felt fine, adding that he would not miss such a feast even if he were on the verge of death. Instructor Grossman, studying the fight, couldn't believe that they had managed to defeat the ninth squad, which was one of the strongest. He had to crush them before Li Han and the others overthought themselves. When he was choosing who would be best suited for the task, Grossman thought of the 7th squad, which, like him, wanted to destroy them. Grossman thought that they would definitely do anything to ensure that the 13th squad didn't get away with it, but he also considered what would happen if the 7th squad lost to them. He was determined not to let that happen and was prepared to do everything he could to prevent such a development. Li Han lay in bed without sleep, thinking about the upcoming trials and his team. His thoughts kept him awake despite his fatigue. He thought he used to have insomnia for fear of exclusion from their organization, but now he had the best partners and had nothing to fear. Li Han realized that he didn't care who their opponent was. He was sure that they would be able to defeat anyone who challenged them. The following day, there was a trial of the Battle of Captains between the 1st and 13th squads. The 1st squad leader asked his team if everyone remembered their plan. He said that they needed to keep a close eye on Jose and Kuro. He added that among the sophomores, their abilities were among the strongest. He was sure they would be able to deal with them, but he realized that their telekinesis might be strong, but a good fight could make them forget about it. The 1st squad leader didn't know what the other fighters' abilities might have been, but he felt that they shouldn't have been a problem. The men of the 1st squad considered their captain to be the most powerful and intelligent, trusted him completely, and obeyed his orders. Dmitri and Del Simon came to watch Li Han's team fight again. Dmitri noticed that after the firearms training, they must have hated the instructors because they had to go back into battle right after it. He knew that the battle was to defeat the team captain, the fighter with the headband. but he believed that the monster from the first squad couldn't be handled by 2 or 3 people. The first squad chose the most significant and potent fighter as captain, so the team could hold off long-range attacks and destroy the enemy. Their tactic was called the charging tank. Dmitri was curious about what Li Han would do and what tactics he would use. Still, Del Simon got tired of listening to him and asked him to shut up. The first squad was shocked to see who was wearing the armband in the 13th squad. They were at a complete loss and had to change their battle tactics. They couldn't understand why the bandage was on Kuro's head. They thought the squad would have chosen Li Han as their captain. The first squad was confused. They didn't know what to do since they couldn't find Li Han. His absence disrupted their plan and caused confusion. Kuro saw the fighters of the first squad approaching him and he was getting scared. His team told him to calm down and pull himself together. They were sure they would succeed. Jose and Knut told him not to worry. They would protect him at any cost, and they were willing to do whatever it took to do so. The leader of the first squad realized that they had to act, and even if one member of the team hid somewhere, they would still not be able to overpower them. He ordered his men with determination to move forward and attack the enemies. At the same time, they remained vulnerable without giving them time to hide. Li Han stood in the tree and saw the enemy's movements. He knew that in the battle of the captains, it was not necessary to destroy the entire team. He realized that all they had to do was defeat the captain with the headband, and then the rest of the team would quickly lose morale, and victory would be his team's. Li Han saw both teams converge in close combat. Jose tried to use fire to inflict maximum damage on the leader of the first squad, but was sure it wouldn't work against them. He noticed his opponent was almost at his desired location and asked if Kuro was ready to act on his plan. Li Han asked him not to worry. He was sure that they were quite well prepared for the battle, and he jumped down from the tree directly onto the enemy. Jose and Knut noticed that the captain of the first squad was already near them. He was incredibly powerful, and it would be very difficult for them to defeat him even with their abilities. The captain of the first squad grabbed Kuro's defending fighters, who couldn't break free of the enemy's steel grip. The first squad was pleased that their captain had managed to capture the enemy. They asked him to hold them tighter, telling him that Kuro they would have been able to disarm without his help. They were sure that no one would be able to stop them on their way to the captain of the 13th squad. They didn't realize they were being attacked by Li Han from above. The first squad had almost reached Kuro. They were sure that victory was within their grasp, and it was only necessary to strike a final blow to end the battle. Kuro realized that the opponent was close by, but he acted as planned. He raised his hands up and began to use telekinesis, but not to attack the opponent. The fighters of the first squad stopped and could not understand where Kuro was looking, so they realized that something had not gone according to their plan. Suddenly, they heard a loud sound behind their backs, as if something heavy had abruptly landed. This instantly made them wary and stopped their attack. They turned around and saw that their captain had been attacked, but they couldn't figure out who had done it and how he had managed to take them by surprise. They gradually realized that they had fallen into the trap that the 13th squad had prepared for them in advance, and their confidence began to be replaced by anxiety. The first squad was stunned to see Li Han, who had managed to defeat their captain. Their confusion was evident, and they realized that this was a battle they had lost. Li Han held out the bandage removed from the captain's head and said it was the end for them and victory was theirs. The fighters watching the fight could not believe that the 13th squad had defeated such a strong opponent. They couldn't believe that Li Han really jumped from such a height. They were sure that the height was at least 5 stories high. It was unbelievable to them. The spectators thought Li Han was insane when he dared to make such a jump, but they believed that he was quite strong in tactics and completely fearless. Dmitri laughed as he heard the fighters talking about Li Han, who had just a few minutes ago been slinging mud at him. He realized that when Li Han was performing like that, it was worth it. The fighters were impressed by Li Han's actions. They knew he used to be on the 7th squad, but he left them for unknown reasons. They couldn't understand why he hadn't competed before and why the leader of the 7th squad hadn't used such a formidable fighter in battles. Instructor Grossman was furious when he heard what the other fighters said about Li Han. They were sure that the leader of the 7th squad clearly didn't realize what Li Han was capable of. Li Han remembered that the day before the battle, he and Kuro had practiced using telekinesis correctly so that he could successfully land it in the right place. After the training session, he approached Kuro. He admitted that he wouldn't expect any problems in a real fight, adding that Kuro was excellently using his abilities. Kuro replied that he was much better and asked Li Han if he was afraid to jump from such a height. To which he replied that if everything had gone wrong, he would have only gotten off with a broken nose, but tomorrow he would have to risk his life. He thought controlling a person with telekinesis was tricky, but all fighters could fly if it was easy. Li Han said that he would hide in a secluded place, wait for the moment to jump, and ask Kuro to ensure that neither he nor the opponent would be hurt during his fall. He asked Kuro to take care of him, but during the fight things didn't go so smoothly. During the landing, Li Han broke his arm. After the fight, Kuro felt bad about it and apologized to him. Li Han replied that everything was fine and asked him not to worry. He added that the mission was difficult, but he did a great job. Knut asked him not to blame himself for this. He said that without him, they would hardly have been able to overpower the captain of the first squad. Jose was sure that until Li Han's arm healed, they wouldn't have any team training. Still, suddenly they received a new notification on their watch. They read the notice and were shocked to learn that they had a new training session and that an air battle against the 7th Squad awaited them in 2 days. One fighter stomped down the hallway of the organization with clenched fists and a tense body ready for action at any second. Instructor Grossman felt someone approaching his office. He became alert and began to prepare for the meeting, not knowing who exactly approached his office. He saw the door open and a familiar face appeared in front of him. He said that he didn't think he would be the one to come to him. Kato, the leader of the 7th Squad, arrived at his office and was quite tense and agitated. It was obvious that he was very angry. The 13th Squad was puzzled as to why they had been assigned a new battle despite their fighter's broken arm. They thought it would have resulted in their defeat, and the 7th Squad would have been thrilled to inflict their first defeat. Jose was sure it was unfair. He was ready to go to management and explain everything to them. He was angry and thought they didn't realize what they were doing. Instructor Grossman told Kato that the 7th Squad had a chance to win, but he noticed that Kato was not confident enough before the important battle. Kato replied that even if Li Han hadn't broken his arm, they would still have beaten them, and Grossman told him to do everything he could to make sure they won. He left the office. Grossman thought that he did not listen to him at all. He demanded from him only victory over the 13th Squad, and nothing else interested him. When Li Han saw his team discussing the new assignment, he asked them to calm down, adding that nothing could be changed and that all they had to do was defeat the enemy. He admitted to them that he didn't have a strategy or rough plan for their actions, but he made them promise that he would figure out a way for them to prevail. Kato heard Li Han make a promise to his team and told him that he hoped it wasn't empty words. He said he wouldn't have been able to handle them with a broken arm. Li Han replied that it caused him some inconvenience, but he was sure that he would have had enough with one hand to defeat his squad. Kaito replied that in an aerial battle, it would not be easy for him to defeat him, to which Li Han said that he would prepare something special for his team. He added that they would be embarrassed if they did not give their best. He was furious at Li Han's words. He had made him promise that he would destroy him and Kuro for betraying his squad. Li Han stopped Kaito and said that he had never destroyed anyone in his life. He asked him not to use such words, or he might regret it. Kato turned around and started to walk away. He asked Li Han to wait a bit, and pretty soon he would see for himself. Li Han realized that Kato would be difficult for them to handle. He looked at his team and said that they needed to go to the gym to train. He realized that fighting with one arm would be difficult and decided that it was time for him to use his telekinesis in battle. He began to train it diligently. However, his telekinesis was quite weak, and he could barely handle controlling a single airboard. He had no other option and needed to use telekinesis in this fight. He thought it was a failure. Even with a healthy arm, he could manage at most 2 artboards, and now he could barely manage 1. Li Han looked at Jose and thought that this task was also not easy for him. He had to control the 2 artboards and his flame simultaneously. He realized that Kuro was their only hope, but the 7th Squad also relied on his abilities, so Li Han didn't want to burden him with too much responsibility. Li Han realized the 7th Squad was well-balanced in physical strength and telekinesis, even without substantial support. Having Kato as a leader and working together made the team much stronger. He realized that they could not win, attacking them head-on. Suddenly, he saw Jose, who informed him that they had another problem. Jose used his fire ability to stare intently ahead, hoping to reach some object with his flame. He explained to Li Han that their problem was that nothing in the air could be set on fire. He added that in this battle, his fire was of little use. Jose said that if they considered the speed of the opponent's movement on the airboards, it would be difficult for him to aim his attack. Li Han, after listening to Josue, realized that he had to urgently strategize to take into account all their weaknesses. He was sure that the opponent would be ruthless in this fight. He didn't realize that they were being secretly watched. When they saw that their training had revealed many problems, they were outraged that they were talking so much at this level of training. Kato and his assistant secretly watched their training. The assistant remarked that he didn't think it was necessary to worry about the opponents. They were sure they wouldn't stand a chance of winning. Li Han and Kato were confident that their squad would win at any cost, and they were ready to fight as hard as they could, knowing there was no other way. The spectators gathered once again to watch the fight. They were shocked to see that the 13th squad had another battle, and despite Li Han's broken arm, they doubted that he would have participated in this battle. Dmitri, seeing that the 13th squad was fighting again, thought that everything was hinting at their loss. He was sure that Instructor Grossman was setting them up. Del Simon was also in the training center. He was interested in watching his potential opponents, and suddenly he felt that someone was standing behind him, but he did not hurry to turn around. He turned around and saw Dmitri Del Simon standing behind him. He couldn't understand what he was doing. Dmitri replied that he remembered that he didn't like him standing next to him and had gotten behind him so as not to disturb him. Del Simon thought Grossman was trying to give each team a chance to win. Still, he knew that the type of training and the squads involved were determined by analyzing the information. He knew that the 13th squad was not easy to defeat this time. He hoped that Li Han had devised a good strategy against a strong opponent. Kato wanted to destroy Li Han and his squad and show all the fighters what could happen to traitors. Li Han asked Jose how he was feeling, to which Jose replied that he was perfectly fine and ready to start rocking out. Jose asked Li Han not to worry about him. He turned to Jose and, with a smile, asked him to take care of them. He said that today, he was the backbone of their strategy. The battle between the 7th and 13th squads had begun, and they needed to launch airboards to attack each other. Onlookers were shocked when they saw how many artboards the 13th squad lifted into the air and couldn't believe they actually did it. Kato couldn't believe his eyes when he saw the airboards. He was in a stupor and didn't know how they managed to lift 16 airboards. It was unbelievable to him. Li Han and his team were ready to give a decent fight to their opponents. Despite their leader's broken arm, they knew how they had to act to achieve victory. Kato knew that the sophomores could only control 2 boards and the support 4. He thought they had surpassed their capabilities, and he was sure Kuro couldn't control 10 boards at once. Li Han noticed Kato's confusion and clarified the situation by telling him everything had been planned, and everyone knew their roles. The men of the 7th squad saw that 16 planks were aimed at them at once, and they were at a loss. Kato, noticing this, told them to calm down and not to be afraid. He added that they needed to stick to their plan for this battle, and he was sure they would succeed in destroying the enemy one by one. Li Han understood that they didn't break for rest during training. Even though his telekinesis abilities were below average, he had learned to concentrate his powers at a desired point in his body. He was sure that if he could develop this skill better than just controlling objects with telekinesis, he would be able to control them much faster. Suddenly, he threw the airboard at his opponent with incredible force. The board flew at a tremendous speed, and it was very difficult for the opponent to dodge this attack. Kato couldn't believe that the 13th squad had decided to use artboards in this way. It shocked him and took him by surprise. He noticed that the airboard was moving too fast, but he could not react and take the necessary action until it reached its target. Li Han remembered that Jose had told him that there weren't many flammable things during the aerial battle, and his fire abilities would be of no use to the team. He approached Jose and said that during the air battle, something could still be set on fire, and he would be a key fighter in that battle. Jose directed his flames at the airborne squad 7 flying past, catching them all together. And then a massive explosion occurred. Dmitri and Del Simon couldn't believe Li Han had decided to use the airboards as bombs. Their surprise was complete. The audience was excited about the fight and wanted Jose to blow up all the airboards. They realized that these boards were insanely expensive, but they wanted to see another explosion like this. Li Han and Jose sent one after another airborne kicks towards their opponent. With each new attack, they managed to take several fighters out. Kato realized that he had to act quickly. He ordered the aide to block the attacks, or their airboards would explode. The aide replied that they could get caught in the approach. Instructor Grossman ran into the training center with all his might and ordered them to stop destroying the expensive airboards immediately. However, despite Grossman's best efforts to stop Li Han, he failed, and his squad continued to follow their strategy to destroy the enemy. After the fight, Li Han stood in Grossman's office, who looked at him silently. Li Han thought it would be easier with Sergeant Red, who would yell at him and let him go. After some thought, Grossman said that it was awkward to start out like that, but he couldn't even imagine how much the airboard alone cost. Li Han calmly said that he realized the value of the airboard, but understood that on the battlefield, it was not important. His decision did not depend on the cost of the equipment. Grossman coldly remarked that if Li Han had not been a member of the organization, the debts for the destroyed airboard would have haunted him for the rest of his life. Li Han was surprised that Grossman was only interested in the destroyed airboards. He thought Grossman wanted to discuss his strategy in the battle. Grossman replied that, technically, he had not broken any rules, but he was sure that Li Han knew it would have caused much controversy. He said that some instructors might have praised him for getting out of the situation that way. He added that he didn't praise him for this choice of strategy, so he asked him to warn him in advance next time if he was thinking of something like this. Grossman let Li Han go, but he approached him and asked him one question that had been bugging him. Grossman gave him permission to ask the question. He said that if they had fought the dragons, there would have been no question, and Grossman wouldn't have asked him about the cost of the airboards. He said they had to prevail at all costs. Li Han asked if that wasn't the purpose of their training. Grossman was shocked when he heard this question. He laughed and was pleasantly surprised that Li Han had caught him. He added that he was similar to one of his acquaintances. Grossman added that he reasoned correctly he would have loved to continue watching him on the battlefield. He said that Li Han could go. When their conversation was over, Li Han turned around and silently left his office. Li Han walked out of the office and noticed that Kato, who was standing outside the door, was upset about his loss to Squad 13. Kato remembered their battle and that he was trying to avoid defeat. He rushed to attack the 13th squad when they wiped out most of his team. He tried his best to get closer to them, avoiding the airboards that Jose was setting on fire. He almost managed to get close enough to make his attack. Suddenly, an airboard exploded behind him, almost throwing him off. Still, he managed to hold on and continue his attack. Kato didn't expect to be attacked by Li Han, who tried to throw him off the board personally, from the smoke from the explosion. He saw Li Han and told him that even though he had won the battle thanks to his strategy, no one would praise him for it. Li Han replied that he wasn't sure about that. He was surprised that Kato had been standing under the door all this time to say those words to him, to which Kato angrily replied that he was walking by and saw him. Kato shouted to the departing Li Han that he would finish him off at any cost and asked him not to lose to anyone until their next battle. In Li Han's room, his team was already waiting for him at the festive table. They once again wanted to celebrate their victory and congratulate him on the brilliantly chosen tactics he had shown in the battle. They were afraid they would be disqualified for breaking the rules, but they were still a little scared, even though they hadn't broken anything. Jose glanced at his watch, thinking it was notice again. He had noticed that their holidays were constantly interrupted by something unexpected. He pointed to the clock where they were once again given tasks. Jose smiled and said this was what had always happened during their celebration. They all looked at their watches and were shocked in 7 days. It would be the battle of Capture the Flag. Their squad would have to fight with the 5th squad. Dmitri, practicing in the gym, thought that to put after one battle immediately another, and with the strongest opponent in this format, was absolute madness. Li Han was not surprised that Grossman put them in another battle. He realized that it was his style. Dmitri finished his workout and walked to his room. He noticed that it was incredibly hot outside, and he wanted to take a shower as soon as possible. Dmitri noticed a familiar fighter approaching him, moving confidently toward the gym from where he was coming. His face was hidden by his long purple hair, and his gaze was tense and frantic around him. You could feel the dark energy emanating from the fighter. Dmitri was stunned to see the former leader of the 5th squad he had replaced. He had never expected to meet him here. He grabbed him by the shoulder, trying to stop him from a conversation. He thought he was ignoring him because he had gone to 3rd year. He cheerfully informed him that their squad was doing well because their leader was now him, but the former leader didn't react to his words. Suddenly, he turned to Dmitri and asked him to leave him alone, or he would be forced to finish him off. Dmitri noticed the crazed look that pierced him to the point of shivering. He couldn't understand what had happened and why he had become so crazy. He asked for details after their battle, adding that he wanted to know everything that had happened. Li Han was trying his best to keep up with the competition that instructor Grossman had assigned them, and he saw his opponent, who was still full of energy, approaching him. He stood his ground, not going to give up. His thoughts jumbled in his head. He couldn't understand who this guy was and why he acted the way he did. Li Han immediately noticed the extraordinary strength of a fighter he had never heard of before. He realized that he would have to be careful with such an opponent. Suddenly, he disappeared, and Li Han found himself in incredible danger. He did not know from where he could start attacking him, as he was incredibly fast and strong. The unknown fighter made his devastating attack, from which Li Han was seriously injured. He could not dodge the attack. It was too fast for him. Li Han dropped his weapon and fell to the ground, unable to resist and defend himself from the unknown fighter's new attacks. 6 days ago, Li Han found himself once again in the office of Instructor Grossman, who had given him some unpleasant news. Grossman could not reveal all the details to him, but he had to inform him of what had happened that concerned their upcoming battle. He said that Dmitri was seriously injured and could not participate in the next competition. However, it would still take place as scheduled. Li Han realized that without Dmitri, the 5th squad would be like a chicken without a head, and victory was in their pocket. Grossman pulled out some papers and said there was another reason he had called him in today that they should talk about. He handed him the papers and said they were requests for transfer between squads. He informed him that several people had desired to join his team. Grossman noted that he knew how to use the fighter's strengths, while Kato received only negative feedback. Li Han looked at the applications and realized that something similar could happen. He scrutinized the applications and thought that most sophomores would like to compete on a level playing field and be on a squad where they could reach their potential. Grossman said he had time to think, but Li Han interrupted him to say that he was accepting everyone into his squad. He explained that they were in no position to choose. The next day, Li Han met with his recruits, who were excited to learn of their acceptance into his squad. He welcomed them into the 13th squad. He informed them that tomorrow they were beginning preparations for the competition, and he would like to examine their superpowers and determine their positions. Suddenly, Zhang Qijo approached him and wanted to ask Li Han to take care of his compatriot in his squad. Li Han replied that in the organization, nationality didn't matter, and if he wanted him taken care of, he would have to prove himself and show what he was capable of. Zhang Qijo continued to ask Li Han to take care of him, but he didn't listen to him anymore and informed him that he was suspended from general training for today. He turned around and started to walk away from the training. He didn't like that Li Han did that to him, so he started to say something in his own language, and the other fighters thought he was saying some swear words. When the day of the battle arrived, the 13th squad noticed that the roof of the stadium began to close suddenly. They thought it was a simulation of night. They thought the instructors deliberately created obstacles to reduce their chances of victory and make the battle even more difficult for their squad. Li Han asked his squad not to relax. They were all in the same conditions, and they needed to wait until their eyes got used to the darkness. He informed them that Knut's team would go first, Jose's team, Kinjo Kuro, would go behind them, and he would attack the enemy from the flank. Li Han added that the 5th squad was their easiest opponent without Dmitri, but they couldn't let their guard down and would have to try their best to win. He ordered the first team to move forward. It was time to attack Jose, and his team leisurely followed them. Li Han was confident that his tactics would help them win. They successfully found and neutralized the enemy team. They thought victory was almost in their hands. They only had to find the flag, and the battle would be over. Li Han was pleased with his team's work and asked if they had all been neutralized, to which Knut replied that one more was near the flag. They noticed an unknown fighter who was calmly watching his team being disarmed. Next to him lay 2 swords that he had not yet used against them. Squad 13 was shocked that the last of the enemy fighters was calmly watching his partners being beaten. Suddenly, the fighter of the 5th squad was able to disable almost all of Li Han's fighters with one attack. He was incredibly fast and strong, and they did not have time to defend themselves from his attacks. Li Han was shocked that he was easily able to beat his fighters. It was incredible. He realized that victory was almost behind them. He did not expect that he would turn out to be so strong. Kuro noticed that the unknown fighter had started attacking them again. He pushed Li Han away so he wouldn't be hit by his attack. He stood in front of Li Han and took the entire blow on himself without thinking of the consequences, thereby protecting himself from the attack. Li Han realized that his attacker could teleportate, which made him elusive. Still, he didn't have time to wonder if he needed to dodge his attacks. He tried to unleash his attack on him, but the unknown man easily dodged it. He moved away to a safe distance to see what they would do next. Chong Kijo was stunned at how quickly their attempts to attack were suppressed. He didn't expect them to be able to get close to him. He lunged forward with determination to strike while the stranger did not move, but the closer he got, the more he doubted the success of his attack. The unknown man easily dodged the blow, gracefully jumping over him as if he had anticipated his every move. Chong Kijo realized that he had made a mistake. He unleashed a devastating attack that knocked Chong Kijo out of the battle, leaving only Li Han on the battlefield. Unknown stood over the defeated enemy. He was ready to continue the battle. The enemy team had failed to do him any damage, and he was full of energy to finish the fight. The fighters who watched the fight could not believe that the 13th squad was eliminated. They knew that behind the skull's mask was a fighter whose name was Silence. Del Simon was shocked when he found out that Li Han had fought Silence. He thought that if it was really him, then Li Han had no chance of defeating him. He knew that his nervous system had been damaged during his training, causing him to lose the ability to speak. Still, his abilities began to develop rapidly, and experiments were conducted on him. They couldn't believe the third graders were so strong, but doubted they could compete as sophomores. Silence turned around and saw that one of the 13th squad fighters had tried to get up, which meant the duel was still going on. Li Han, gathering all his strength to get up, said that he didn't know who he was, but there was no way he would lose to him. He awakened his psychokinesis to try to overpower Silence, an incredibly strong opponent, but Li Han was confident that he would be able to prevail. Silence prepared to attack Li Han. His determination was strong, and he was going to do his best to end their duel. Del Simon watched their fight intently, and he realized that the Silence was much stronger than that of all the sophomores. He was sure it was impossible to defeat him, and wondered what Li Han would do to ensure his squad would win. Li Han carefully watched Silence's actions. He realized that if he didn't block his attack, he would be finished, but he couldn't lose to him so easily. He figured he was covering about 15 meters in a second, and he wasn't saving his strength. Now, he would be moving even faster. Li Han realized that the purpose of the competition was not to defeat everyone, including Silence, but to capture the opponent's flag. If he could stop him, they would win. He realized he could only do that when he used his teleportation ability. Then, he would have a chance to get closer to the flag. Li Han realized that after using teleportation, there was a blur of space around him, giving him a brief moment to react to his opponent's actions. He began to count how much the Silence had used his ability to understand when to be ready for his attack. Li Han counted to 3 attempts and ducked sharply. The silent attack passed him by, and he managed to avoid being hit at the last moment. He decided that now was a better time to retaliate. He got up and tried to hit Silence, but Silence dodged, and Li Han's blow only slightly caught him. Silence abruptly launched a counterattack, and Li Han fell to the ground. Silence approached him and prepared to deliver a decisive blow. But suddenly Li Han began to smile, which stupefied his opponent, who could not understand why he suddenly began to do so. Li Han noticed that his weapon, which he had tossed up in his attack, was coming back towards him, and the Silence standing over him knew nothing about it. He saw that his plan had worked, and the kick came right on target. This was Li Han's chance to capture the opponent's flag. The Silence was shocked that Li Han had managed to outsmart him. He realized he needed to immediately attack and avenge the missed strike. Li Han grabbed the flag and said that after being hit, he regained consciousness in 3 seconds, which was astonishing to him, but it was enough time for him to grab the flag. He turned around and smiled, telling him that they had won, that the fight was over, and that now he could rest, enjoying his victory. Del Simon couldn't believe that he had managed to defeat the third-year student. He had heard how other fighters wanted to join his squad, and it made him even angrier. The next day, Kuro went out with a smile, looking for a street cat. He always enjoyed the opportunity to feed a stray friend and spend time with him. He was happy to see a cat that was not afraid to come out to him. Kuro petted it and said that a cat was living near his childhood home, and they were very similar. Kuro sadly said that he had no friends or outstanding talents, and he always looked different from the other kids. He smiled and added that he had something he was pretty good at. He had friends now and was perfectly happy. Chonkijo approached Kuro and thought he was strange if he talked to the cat. He was sure his abilities were better than Kuro's, so he asked him what he was so passionate about. Kuro didn't notice that he walked up to him, and when he spoke to him, he was slightly startled. Chonkijo said that he added that they could discuss something with him on their day off. He reminded Kuro that their squad still didn't have a deputy head named Lee Han, and felt that this was creating more difficulties for the team. Chonkijo told him that he would like to take the position even though he had only recently joined the squad, and it would be good if he supported his candidacy. He noticed Kuro's cat rubbing against his leg, told him to stop messing with his stuff, and kicked the cat with all his might. Kuro was shocked to see Chonkijo hit the cat he was feeding. He didn't expect such an act and couldn't understand why he did it. Chonkijo continued to talk about his desired position. Still, Kuro, seeing that the cat was running away, asked him to move over and let him pass. Kuro got angry and started showing him his abilities. Despite being on the same team, he was ready to fight him. Chonkijo, seeing the angry Kuro, was frightened when he started to apply psychokinesis. He didn't expect it to be so strong. Kuro picked up the trash can behind Kijo's back and crumpled it into a small ball. He was shocked and realized that Kuro's abilities surpassed his. He told Kijo never to do that again, or he would pay dearly for it, to which Kijo replied to calm down and apologize. Kuro calmed down and tried to chase after the frightened kitten Kijo, who fell to the ground and was glad he didn't maim him. The little kitten had already run far away. He was scared and came running to the hospital, where Lee Han came to Dmitri to check on him and find out what had happened to him. When Dmitri saw Lee Han, he told him that he didn't think he had come to see him for nothing and asked him the real reason for his visit. He added that he only assumed that the organization was not telling him something. Still, when he saw Lee Han, it became clear. Lee Han listened to him without surprise and noted that he knew about a third-year student's attack on him. Dmitri told him that this was the former leader of his squad, and he noted that all the third graders were utterly different. He added that they were not just different. He hadn't even moved, and he had already launched his attack and knocked him out. Lee Han thought it was the first time he had seen him so upset. Dmitri said that there was something else strange. He noticed that the former leader of his squad was not himself, as if he were crazy. Lee Han said that if he hadn't been like this from the beginning, it might have been due to training in the third year. He said that the organization had almost no equipment for third-year students, and it was not easy to meet them here. He said the transition to sophomore year was not that difficult, and it only meant one thing. His skills and experience would soon be put to the test. Lee Han was sure that a real battle would await them before they graduated from their second year. Dmitri agreed with him. Everything pointed to that. They couldn't imagine what might have happened to them when they moved on to their third year. The unknown frightened them a little, but they were sure that everything would be all right. Kuro managed to find his cat. He ran up and happily grabbed him. He said he was sorry he got hit. He wanted to go back with him and give him more goodies. Suddenly, Kuro saw that a man in a special suit approached him and asked him who he was. Kuro was stunned and didn't answer him. Kuro looked at him carefully and continued to remain silent. The man repeated his question, and Kuro thought his voice sounded familiar. The man opened the mask of the suit, and Kuro saw Sergeant Red, who didn't recognize him. He said he had changed a lot since the last time they met. They went to the organization's development center. Sergeant Red thought Kuro was lost. He had wandered too far, and he knew he shouldn't be here. Sergeant Red said he would be picked up soon and returned to the dormitory. He gave him a soda and added that he could drink it before they took him away. Kuro opened a soda can and couldn't believe Sergeant Red was staying calm and not mad at him. Sergeant Red couldn't understand why he should be angry with him, but he soon realized Kuro was worried about being in this place. He said the second-generation telearmor was in the testing phase and would be announced soon. He didn't see anything wrong with Kuro seeing it ahead of time. He knew that sophomores could no longer leave the organization. Kuro agreed with him. He said that after the reinforcement, they could not leave the organization unless they completely lost their fighting ability. He understood that they had become a resource for the organization. Red replied that he was right and added that those who were angry for no reason were fools. These words shocked Kuro. He didn't expect to hear them from the sergeant. Kuro wondered if the sergeant understood the meaning of his words, or if he was just speaking to fill the silence. He turned around and saw an old man asking Red how the armor test went. The sergeant replied that he expected such a question and said that the armor reacted to telekinesis just fine. Red added that they should have reduced the amount of dragon flesh material in the internal system. This was important to increase its power, but if it was so sensitive, it would be harder to control. He put a hand on Kuro's shoulder. He said that, unlike the first generation, they could calibrate their telekinesis as easily as breathing. The old man listened to the sergeant's wishes and considered them. When he noticed Kuro, he extended his hand and said it was a pleasure to meet him. The old man said that he was the head of the first group, and his name was Charles Smith. Kuro extended his hand in return and also told him his name. Sergeant Red informed Kuro that this old man had created the telearmor for them and was an absolute legend. The old man told Kuro that the first-generation telearmor had been assembled quickly and had specific flaws. The second generation was much better, and he was sure that this armor would be a perfect weapon. Sergeant Red said it was specially made for people like him. Kuro looked at it and thought he would have to wear the armor he saw on the sergeant. Kuro suddenly realized that they could soon be involved in a real battle with dragons, a thought that frightened him, and he was not yet ready for such a fight. Sergeant Red and the old man went outside to see Kuro off. Afterward, Red said that they would definitely meet again. They waited while Kuro got into the car. As soon as he drove off, Sergeant Red asked the old man what would happen to the armor he had tested for him that day. The old man replied that they would take it apart and work with each one separately. He added that they didn't have much dragon material at the time. The sergeant suggested that the old man keep the armor sample. He said there was no telling who might need it at what point. Li Han knew that the day in the organization started at 5 a.m., but he got up every day at 4 o'clock to have time to make all his plans for the coming day. He always got up early to write down battle strategies, noting the key traits of squad members and other features that assessed his abilities against theirs. Li Han knew that his telekinesis was still below average. He was sure that in that case it was of little use. He couldn't use the absolute telekinesis ability that Instructor Wei had told him about. Despite that, he was glad because he had discovered an ability only he possessed among the sophomores. Kuro and Simon could use telekinesis to turn a pencil into a powerful weapon, but they couldn't write with it. Li Han realized that when it came to control, he surpassed others, but he had to train much more to improve his accuracy. He looked at his watch and decided it was time for him to go. That was the end of the telekinesis training. Li Han and his squad ran out for their morning training, each knowing that the upcoming battles required full physical readiness. He noticed that running alongside his squad was Dimitri's squad, who had fully recovered from his injury. Li Han was happy to see Dimitri. He asked him if he liked the spatial crack they had seen yesterday. Dimitri replied that there was nothing special about it, but he didn't like that it was too bright. He thought it was just right for a date and laughed out loud. Li Han knew the spatial crack was the trace left behind after the battle of the dragon units and the closing of the gate. On Grossman's orders, the sophomores were split into 2 groups and sent to inspect the crack. Grossman told them that spatial fissures were places where the Earth and the other world intersected, and it was believed that people with telekinesis abilities appeared in their world because of them. He thought it would be helpful for them to see the fissure. He added that it was not dangerous and asked them not to worry. The fissure had formed over 10 years ago and had not been active until then. Li Han said that he had heard that the telekinetics were experiencing strange sensations as they approached the fissure. Dimitri added that they were getting dizzy, and it was hard to describe, but they would soon see it for themselves. Dimitri finished talking to Li Han and told his squad to run even faster. He was strong and could run for a long time, but his team was already almost out of strength. Li Han gathered his squad and informed them they were meeting at the helipad at 10 in the morning after the showers. They had free time and could decide for themselves what to do. Jose remembered how visiting the crack reminded him of a school field trip. For a moment, he felt the same curiosity and excitement. Li Han told them they were free and could go, so the squad turned around and headed back to the dormitory. Suddenly, another fighter approached him, greeted him, and offered to have breakfast together if he didn't mind his company. Li Han recognized him. It was John, the head of the 10th squad. He smiled at him and said he didn't mind talking to him, to which John replied that it was a pleasure to be remembered by him. He remembered that after defeating the Silence, Grossman didn't want them to lose to anyone, much less easily. Still, they had suffered a few defeats. The 10th squad had been one of those who had managed to do so. Li Han said that he had always considered John's strategies and wanted to talk to him about them, to which John replied that he was no match for him in choosing strategies.